Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been hesitating to write this down for weeks now. Part of me still can't believe what happened, and another part just wants to forget it. But I keep having these dreams, and I figured maybe sharing it might help me process everything. This happened back in early October when my wife Sophia and I decided to take a drive to see the fall colors. We live near Spanish Fork in Utah, and everyone knows the fall foliage in Covered Bridge Canyon is pretty spectacular this time of year. It was a Sunday afternoon. The weather was perfect. Not too hot, not too cold, just that crisp autumn air that makes you want to be outside. Let's drive up to Sterling Hollow, I suggested over breakfast. The aspens should be peaking right about now. Sophia agreed immediately. She's always up for these little adventures, and we hadn't been out of the house much that week due to work. So we packed some sandwiches, filled our water bottles, grabbed a couple of light jackets, and hopped in our Jeep Wrangler. The drive there is only about 20 minutes from our place, heading east through Spanish Fork Canyon, and then turning onto a dirt road that winds up toward the Sterling Hollow trailhead. We've been there dozens of times over the years, hiked practically every trail in the area. It's our go-to spot when we need to get away without going too far. The dirt road was a bit washboarded, but nothing the Jeep couldn't handle. As we climbed higher, the view got better and better. Patches of bright yellow aspens mixed with the deep red of maples and the evergreens. Sophia kept pointing out particularly beautiful spots as I navigated the road. We reached the trailhead parking area around 2 in the afternoon. There were only 2 other cars there. Not surprising for a Sunday, but still fewer than I expected given how nice the weather was. I pulled into a spot near the edge of the lot with a good view of the valley below. Want to hike a bit or just enjoy the view from here? I asked as I turned off the engine. Let's at least stretch our legs, Sophia said, already reaching for the door handle. The moment I stepped out of the Jeep, something felt off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on at first. The air was still, maybe a little too still. No birds singing, which I remember thinking was odd. Usually this place is full of chickadees and jays. I chalked it up to the time of day or maybe the season. We both walked toward the trailhead sign, and I noticed Sophia hugging herself, despite it not being that cold. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded but looked around nervously. "I don't know. Do you feel that?" "Feel what?" "Like we're being... I don't know how to describe it. Like we're being watched or something?" Now that she mentioned it, I did feel a strange heaviness in the air, an uneasiness that seemed to seep into my skin. I've been in the woods my entire life, hunting, hiking, camping, and I know the normal sounds and feelings of a forest. This wasn't normal. "Maybe we should get back to the car," Sophia suggested, her voice quieter than usual. I didn't argue. Something about the place suddenly felt unwelcoming, like we had stepped into someone else's territory without permission. We turned around and walked quickly back to the Jeep. I unlocked it with the remote, and we both got in, shutting the doors a little harder than necessary. "That was weird," I said, trying to sound casual about it. "Maybe a storm's coming or something." Sophia was looking out her window, scanning the tree line. "Maybe." I put the key in the ignition, but hadn't turned it yet when something caught my eye to the left of the parking area, about 50 yards away, where a patch of scrub oak met an open meadow. At first, it was just movement, something large and dark moving through the brush. I squinted, thinking it might be a moose or a black bear. We see them occasionally up here, though bears are pretty rare. Then it stepped into a clearing, and my heart nearly stopped. It was bipedal, walking on 2 legs, but hunched forward as it moved. The entire body was covered in dark, almost black hair or fur that looked matted in places. Even hunched over as it was, I could tell this thing was huge, at least 6 feet tall, probably more if it stood upright. It moved with surprising speed and agility for something so large, crossing the open ground in just seconds before disappearing into the aspen trees on the other side. The whole sighting couldn't have lasted more than 10 seconds, but time seemed to slow down while I watched it. I felt my mouth go dry and my hands start to shake on the steering wheel. Did you see that?" I whispered, not wanting to take my eyes off the spot where the creature had vanished. Sophia's voice was barely audible. "Yes." "What do you think it was? A bear, maybe? They can stand on their hind legs." "David." Her tone made me turn to look at her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. That wasn't a bear. That wasn't a moose. That definitely wasn't a cow. Then what? It was a Bigfoot. She said it with such certainty that I didn't even think to laugh. I saw it clearly. I was watching it the whole time, from when it came out of the brush until it went into the trees. It had arms, long arms, and it walked like a human, but not exactly. More like an ape that's used to walking upright. I turned back to stare at the tree line where the creature had disappeared. My hands were still shaking. I'd always been skeptical about Bigfoot stories. Sure, I'd heard them my whole life. Utah has its share of sightings, but I'd always written them off as misidentifications or hoaxes. Maybe it was someone in a costume. Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. No human could move that way, with that speed and fluid motion. And who would be out here in the middle of nowhere in a costume anyway? "Start the car," Sophia said quietly. "Please, let's just go." I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, louder than usual in the strange silence of the forest. I threw the Jeep into reverse, then into drive, and we started down the dirt road faster than was probably safe. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what we'd seen. A bear walking oddly, some kind of escaped exotic animal. But deep down, I knew those explanations didn't fit. "Did you notice how we felt before we even saw it?" Sophia finally broke the silence. "That feeling of being watched, of something not being right? I've read that people often report feeling that way before Bigfoot sightings. They have some kind of presence that people can sense." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I don't know what to think. The drive home was tense. We kept looking at each other, then away, both of us processing what had happened. By the time we got back to our house, I'd started to doubt myself. Memory is fallible after all. Maybe in the shadows and strange light of the forest, an ordinary animal had taken on extraordinary characteristics in our minds. But Sophia was certain. "I know what I saw, David, and I know you saw it too." That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that dark figure moving through the trees kept replaying in my mind. Around midnight, I made a decision that, in retrospect, was probably pretty stupid. "I'm going back," I told Sophia, who was also wide awake beside me. "What? Now? Are you crazy?" "I need to know. I need to see if there's any evidence. If there isn't, then maybe we can write this off as our imaginations getting the better of us." She argued with me, of course, said it was dangerous to go into the mountains at night, especially after what we'd seen. But I was determined. Eventually she realized she couldn't talk me out of it, but refused to come along. I couldn't blame her. I grabbed a powerful flashlight, my phone, fully charged, and a small backpack with water and a first aid kit. I also took my hunting knife. Not that it would do much good against something like what we'd seen, but it made me feel a little better. The drive back to Sterling Hollow was eerie. The road was completely deserted, and my headlights cut through the darkness like they were trying to pierce a solid wall. When I reached the trailhead parking area, it was empty. I parked in the same spot as before and sat there for a few minutes, gathering my courage. That same feeling of wrongness was still there, even stronger at night. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and go home, but I forced myself to get out of the Jeep. The night was cold and utterly silent. No wind, no animal sounds, not even insects. Just the sound of my own breathing and heartbeat pounding in my ears. I switched on my flashlight and walked slowly to the spot where we'd seen the creature emerge from the scrub oak. The beam of light revealed broken branches and disturbed ground. Something had definitely come through here, something heavy enough to leave obvious signs of passage. I followed the trail to the open ground, then toward the aspen grove where the creature had disappeared. At the edge of the aspens, I found more evidence, a clear trail through the fallen leaves, broken twigs, and what looked disturbingly like a footprint in a patch of soft earth. It was large, much larger than my boot, and showed what appeared to be 5 toes, not a bear, not a moose, not a human. I took out my phone and snapped some pictures, though in the harsh light of my flash, they didn't come out very clear. I was about to try to follow the trail further into the trees when I heard a sound that froze me in place. It was a low, rumbling sound, not quite a growl, not quite a breath, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond my flashlight's beam. Then the distinct crack of a branch breaking, as if under a heavy weight. I'd like to say I was brave enough to investigate further. I wasn't. I turned and ran back to my Jeep as fast as my legs could carry me, nearly falling several times in my panic. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. As I was about to pull away, my headlights illuminated something at the edge of the parking area. For just a split second, I saw a dark figure standing partly concealed by a tree. Tall, massive, watching. Then I blinked, and it was gone, if it had ever been there at all. I drove home in a state of near shock, my mind unable to process everything I'd experienced. When I got home, Sophia was waiting up, terrified something had happened to me. I showed her the photos on my phone, but they were disappointing, just vague images of disturbed ground and what might or might not be a footprint. "I believe you," she said simply. "I believe what we saw." It's been 3 weeks now. We haven't told many people. Who would believe us? I've done some research online and found other reports from the same area over the years, similar descriptions, similar feelings of unease before the sightings. We're not the first, and I doubt we'll be the last. We haven't been back to Sterling Hollow. I'm not sure we ever will. Some places deserve to be left alone, and some things maybe aren't meant to be found. But I know what we saw that day. And sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I still hear that low, rumbling sound from the darkness, and I wonder if it's watching, waiting for us to return to its territory. Story 2. I've been holding this in for over 10 years now, and I need to finally get it off my chest. I've told a few close friends, but most people just look at me like I'm nuts. So here goes. It happened in the summer of 2013. I was 23 and 5 months pregnant with my daughter. The pregnancy had been rough, morning sickness that lasted all day, swollen feet, the works. My godmother, Janice, had been checking in on me regularly since my husband worked long hours at the plant. That day was hot, like stupid hot, the kind of humid July heat that makes you feel like you're breathing through a wet towel. I'd been cooped up in our apartment for days, and I was going stir crazy. When Janice called and asked if I wanted to go for a drive, I jumped at the chance. She picked me up around 4 in the afternoon in her old blue Subaru with the broken AC. We had the windows down, music playing, just enjoying being out. We were driving around the outskirts of Rochester, no destination in mind, just cruising the back roads with the windows down, hoping to catch a breeze. I remember we'd stopped at this little ice cream stand on the way. I had a chocolate milkshake that I'd been nursing for about 20 minutes. We were heading south on Union Street, approaching that underpass where Highway 531 goes over. If you know the area, there are these huge cabbage fields on the right side of the road there. The cabbage was in full growth, these big green heads stretching out in perfect rows. Beyond the field was this thick line of brush and small trees that kind of bordered the property. I was looking out the window, one hand on my belly, parking at a distance and watching the field with binoculars. I never saw it again. My daughter was born that November, healthy and perfect. As the years passed, I got caught up in motherhood, and my Bigfoot obsession took a back seat. But I never forgot what I saw. That image, the massive figure with the reddish fur standing at the edge of the cabbage field. It's still as clear in my mind today as it was 10 years ago. I didn't tell many people about my experience. My husband knows, and he believes that I believe I saw something, which is about as supportive as I could hope for. A few close friends know, but that's it. It's not something you casually bring up in conversation. But recently, I saw a documentary about unexplained creatures, and it brought it all flooding back. That's when I decided I needed to share my story. I know how it sounds. I know most people will think I'm crazy or attention-seeking, or that I was just a hormonal pregnant woman who saw a bear or a deer and let my imagination run wild. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person in a costume. It wasn't a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. It was something unknown, something that shouldn't exist according to science, but does. That day changed me. Before, I was certain about how the world worked. I believed in what I could see and touch, what could be proven and explained. Now, I'm not so sure. Now I look at the woods differently when I drive past them. I wonder what might be watching from just beyond the tree line. Sometimes when I'm driving down Union Street, past that same cabbage field, I slow down and scan the brush line, hoping for another glimpse. My daughter, who's 10 now, always asks why I drive so slowly there. One day, I might tell her the truth. Or maybe I'll keep it to myself, this strange secret that changed how I see the world. I've never reported this officially until now. What would I say? Who would I even report it to? But I know what I saw that hot summer day in 2013. And I'm absolutely certain that standing at the edge of that cabbage field, watching over the rows of green, was a Bigfoot. I still don't have any answers. Just this memory that I can't explain and can't forget. And sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if it's still out there, moving through that corridor of wilderness, watching and waiting while we go about our lives, oblivious to what shares this world with us. Story 3. I've kept this story to myself for most of my life. People don't believe you when you tell them something like this. I've tried a few times over the years, only to get those looks, you know the ones, where people smile politely while their eyes say they think you're either lying or crazy. But what happened to me that summer day in 1984 was real, and I need to finally get it off my chest. I was 9 years old. My family was visiting my grandmother's friends in rural Missouri, somewhere outside of Springfield, I think. I remember it was July and brutally hot, the kind of sticky, suffocating heat that makes your clothes cling to your skin and your hair stick to the back of your neck. I remember complaining about it constantly, which probably annoyed my parents to no end. The property was huge, acres and acres of land with woods and a river cutting through it. For a kid from the suburbs, it was both exciting and intimidating. Everything felt bigger somehow. The trees were taller, the sky wider, the shadows deeper. On our second day there, everyone decided to go for a walk along this river trail. It wasn't anything fancy, just a worn dirt path that meandered alongside the water. My dad kept pointing out different birds and plants, trying to make it educational, I guess. My mom and grandmother were walking with their friends, talking about boring adult stuff. I remember feeling antsy, the way kids do when they're forced to move at an adult's pace. I started walking faster, getting ahead of everyone. At first, my mom called out for me to stay where she could see me, but I think she got distracted by the conversation. Nobody seemed to care that I was pushing further ahead. I felt this weird sense of freedom, like I was exploring on my own for the first time. The trail curved and bent around trees and rock formations. Each time I rounded a corner, I felt more alone, more independent. Looking back, I must have gotten about 150 yards ahead of everyone else, far enough that I couldn't hear their voices anymore, far enough that several bends in the path completely blocked them from view. The excitement of being on, my own, quickly gave way to a creeping uneasiness. The woods felt different without the buffer of adult conversation. I could hear every snap of twigs, every rustle of leaves. The river sound, which had seemed pleasant before, now felt loud and overwhelming. I remember slowing down, thinking maybe I should wait for everyone to catch up. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought someone had left a pile of something on the trail. From a distance, it looked like a mound of, I don't know, clothes maybe, or a large garbage bag. But as I got closer, I realized it was moving slightly, breathing. I froze in my tracks, maybe 30 feet away. The thing was sitting in the middle of the path, hunched over. I couldn't make out what it was. Not a person, definitely not a deer or any animal I recognized. My brain kept trying to make sense of what I was seeing, to fit it into some category I understood. Then it stood up. I will never, ever forget that moment. The way it unfolded itself, rising up and up and up. It seemed to keep going, getting taller and taller until it towered over me. I'm not exaggerating when I say this thing was huge. My head barely reached the tips of its fingers as they hung from these impossibly long arms. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, I couldn't even look up at its face. My eyes were locked on its feet, which were now inches from my face. They were enormous. Not like bear paws or anything I could recognize, just massive, with a strange shape I can't even properly describe. Time seemed to stop. I have no idea how long I stood there, paralyzed with fear. It could have been seconds or minutes. All I know is that I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My entire body was rigid, like I'd turned to stone. The worst part was the silence. This thing made absolutely no sound. No breathing, no rustling, nothing. And there was no smell either, which seems weird to mention, but it stuck with me all these years. Something that big should have had some kind of scent, right? But there was nothing. I kept my eyes down, fixed on those feet. I was too terrified to look up, afraid of what I might see if I raised my eyes to its face. Something in me, some primal instinct, told me that making eye contact would be dangerous. The next thing I remember is running. I have no memory of the creature walking away or stepping aside. It's like one moment it was there, filling my entire field of vision, and the next I was sprinting back down the trail toward my family. I don't remember making the decision to run. I don't remember turning around. I just remember the feeling of my feet pounding against the dirt, my lungs burning, tears streaming down my face. I ran straight into my dad, who was just coming around one of the bends in the trail with the others. I was hysterical, trying to explain between gasps what I'd seen. I remember my words tumbling out incoherently, big and tall and monster all jumbled together. My dad crouched down, holding my shoulders, telling me to slow down and breathe. When I finally managed to explain, the adults all exchanged that look, the one that says, "Oh, it's just a kid with an overactive imagination." My dad suggested it was probably a bear that stood up on its hind legs, which made the others nod in agreement. My mom thought maybe it was just a deer that I'd startled. My grandmother's friend, trying to be kind, said that sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're alone in the woods. Not one of them believed me. Not one of them took me seriously. Dad walked back up the trail a little way, calling out as he went, but came back saying there was nothing there. I remember feeling so frustrated, so misunderstood. I knew what I saw wasn't a bear or a deer. I knew it wasn't my imagination. The rest of the visit was tense. I refused to go back on the trail. I wouldn't even play outside unless someone was with me. At night, I had terrible nightmares where I was running down an endless path with something massive chasing me. My parents started getting annoyed, probably thinking I was being dramatic for attention. On the drive home, my mum tried to have a rational conversation with me about it. She explained that when we're scared, our minds can distort things. She told me about optical illusions and how our brains try to make sense of what we see by fitting it into patterns we recognize. I remember sitting in the back seat, staring out the window, not saying a word. What was the point? They'd already decided I was either lying or confused. For years afterward, I tried to make sense of what happened. I'd go to the library and look through books about North American wildlife, thinking maybe I'd find something that matched what I saw. Nothing ever came close. As I got older, I started researching cryptids and folklore creatures, wondering if others had seen similar things. Some accounts had similarities, but nothing that perfectly matched my experience. I'm 48 now, and I still think about that day. The memory hasn't faded or distorted with time. If anything, it's become clearer. I can still feel the oppressive heat, still see those massive feet just inches from my face, still feel that paralyzing fear. What bothers me most isn't just what I saw, but what happened after. The dismissal. The way nobody considered that maybe, just maybe, I had encountered something that didn't fit into their understanding of the world. It taught me early on that there are some experiences you just keep to yourself. I've gone back and forth over the years about what it could have been. Was it some undiscovered species, some being that doesn't want to be found? Was it something not from here? I honestly don't know, but I know what I saw was real. The strangest part is that despite how terrified I was, I don't think it meant to harm me. It could have. I was completely vulnerable, frozen in place. But it didn't make any aggressive moves. It was just there. And then it wasn't. Sometimes I wonder if others have encountered it too. If there are other people out there who've had similar experiences, but like me, learned to keep quiet about them. I wonder if these beings, whatever they are still out there in those woods, avoiding human contact as much as possible. I think they need protection from us more than we need protection from them. Humans have a tendency to destroy what they don't understand, to fear what's different. If people knew these beings existed, what would happen to them? So I guess that's my story. I still don't know what I saw that day in Missouri. I probably never will. But I know it was real, and I know it changed me. It opened my eyes to the possibility that the world is stranger and more mysterious than most of us are willing to admit. And honestly, I kind of like knowing that there are still mysteries out there. Things that defy explanation. Things that remind us how little we actually know about the world we live in. Story 4. I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. What happened that winter night in '98 has stayed with me for over 20 years now, and I've never been able to make sense of it. I was 14 then, living with my family on this 5-acre property at the top of a mountain near Linden, Utah. It was pretty isolated, nothing behind us except wilderness all the way to Pleasant Grove. Just us, the deer, and the rabbits that would come through our yard almost daily. It was a Friday night in January, probably around 10:30. The snow had been falling on and off for days, but that night was clear. The moon was full, lighting everything up almost like daytime. Me, my parents, and my little brother Jake were in the basement playing ping pong. We had this walkout basement with a sliding glass door that led to the backyard. Red, my Labrador, was scratching at the door, wanting to go out. He was always super protective of us. Typical lab behavior, but he took his job seriously. I slid the door open and he bolted out into the yard. Almost immediately, he started acting weird. Not just the usual excited dog behavior, but something I'd never seen before. He ran to the edge of our property near our neighbor's ravine and just stood there, barking like crazy. It wasn't his normal bark. This was different, deeper, more aggressive, almost desperate. The hair on his back was standing straight up. "What's wrong with Red?" my mom asked, glancing up from the ping pong table. I shrugged. "I don't know. I'll check." I went to the door and called him, but he wouldn't budge. Just kept barking at something I couldn't see from inside. That's when I decided to go look. "I'm gonna see what he's barking at," I told my family, reaching for the switch to turn off the outside light. My dad looked up. "Why are you turning the light off?" "The moon's so bright I can see better without it," I explained. "The porch light creates glare on the glass." With the light off, I pressed my face against the glass door. Red was still going nuts, barking at the tree line about 30 meters from our house. I scanned the area, squinting to see better in the moonlight. At first, there was nothing, just the silvery glow on the snow and the dark outlines of pine trees. Then I saw it. Standing right at our property line was something, a silhouette against the moonlight. It was tall, really tall. The head had this weird, perfect oval shape, like someone wearing a beanie pulled down tight. But the proportions were all wrong. Even from that distance, I could tell this thing was massive. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wasn't scared exactly, more like completely confused. My brain was trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Jake," I called over my shoulder, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come here, look at this." My 11-year-old brother came over and I pointed toward the figure. "Do you see that? By the tree line?" He squinted, then his eyes went wide. "What is that? Is that a person?" "I don't know," I whispered. We both just stood there, staring. The figure didn't move for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds or so. Red was still barking his head off, but he wouldn't go any closer to it. That's what really got to me. Red wasn't afraid of anything. He'd chase off coyotes without hesitation, but he wouldn't approach this thing. The strangest part was how I felt. It's hard to explain, but I had this overwhelming sense that trying to communicate with it would be pointless. Not because it couldn't understand, but because it wouldn't want to. I felt like I was looking at something that had no interest in human interaction. After maybe a minute or two of us just staring at each other, me and Jake from the safety of our glass door, and this thing from the edge of the forest, it moved. It didn't turn away like a person would. It just lowered its head slightly and started moving toward the ravine. The way it moved was all wrong, fluid but too smooth for a human, and completely silent. That's what really freaked me out. It was moving through ankle-deep snow, but I couldn't hear a single footstep. Nothing crunching, no branches breaking, just absolute silence as this huge figure glided into the trees and disappeared. Red finally stopped barking once it was gone. He stood there for another minute, then trotted back to the house like nothing had happened. When I let him in, he was trembling. Red, this 70-pound lab who wasn't afraid of anything, was shaking. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, turning back to my parents who were still at the ping-pong table. "See what?" my dad asked. I tried to explain what we'd seen, but I could tell they thought it was just some neighbor, or maybe a deer standing on its hind legs. They hadn't seen it from the angle we had. It was probably just Bill from next door checking his property. "Line," my mom suggested. But Bill was maybe 5'9", and this thing was way taller than me, and I was already 6'3" at 14. Plus, who checks their property line at 10:30 at night in the dead of winter? I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my mind, trying to make it fit into something familiar. A person wearing some weird costume, a really tall hunter. Nothing made sense. The next morning, I went out as soon as it was light to look for footprints. The snow had started melting overnight, and whatever tracks might have been there were mostly gone. There were some indentations in the snow near where the figure had been standing, but they were too melted to make anything out clearly. I spent hours that day wandering around our property, looking for any sign of what we'd seen. Nothing. No broken branches, no clear footprints, no evidence at all. Over the next few weeks, I asked around town if anyone else had seen anything strange. No one had, or at least no one admitted to it. But I noticed something weird. Red wouldn't go to that part of the yard anymore. For a dog who loved exploring every inch of our property, he suddenly developed an aversion to that specific area near the ravine. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. Maybe it was just a really tall person. Maybe the oval head was just a weird hat. Maybe the silence was because the snow muffled the sound. But deep down, I knew better. About a month later, I was at the library in Pleasant Grove and found myself browsing books about local folklore. I wasn't even looking for anything specific, just curious. That's when I came across an old book about Bigfoot sightings in Utah. I'd never really believed in that stuff before, but something made me flip through it. There was a section about sightings in Utah County dating back to the 60s. One account from '78 described a tall, silent figure with an oval-shaped head, seen near the foothills not far from our property. The person who reported it said the same thing about how it moved, smoothly and without making a sound. My blood ran cold reading that. It was exactly what we'd seen. When I got home, I tried to tell Jake about what I'd found, but he shut me down immediately. "I don't want to talk about it," he said, looking genuinely uncomfortable. It was probably just some weirdo in the woods. But I couldn't shake it. Over the years, I've researched other similar sightings in the area. There aren't many, but they exist, all describing the same thing: tall, oval head, silent movement. We moved away from that house 2 years later when my dad got a job in Colorado. I was almost relieved to leave. Even though we never saw the figure again, I always felt watched when I was in the backyard, especially near that ravine. I'm 37 now, with a family of my own. I've never told my wife the full story because I know how it sounds. But sometimes, when we're camping and the kids are asleep, I find myself scanning the tree line, half expecting to see that silhouette again. Red died when I was 20, but until his last day, he never went near that part of our yard again. Dogs know things we don't. They sense things we can't. And whatever Red saw that night scared him in a way nothing else ever did. I still don't know what we saw that winter night. Logic tells me there has to be a rational explanation, but logic also tells me that what I saw moved in a way that wasn't human, stood taller than any person in our community, and silenced a dog that feared nothing else. Whatever it was watching us before we noticed it. How long had it been standing there? Had it been there on other nights when we hadn't noticed? These questions still keep me up sometimes. I've never been back to that property, though I've thought about it. Part of me wants to go back to see if I feel anything. Another part never wants to set foot there again. All I know for certain is that my brother and I saw something that night that doesn't fit into the world as I understand it. And after all these years, I still find myself looking a little too long at the tree line when I'm in wooded areas at night, wondering if somewhere in the shadows something is looking back. Story 5. I've been putting off writing about this for years, but I need to finally get it out. I haven't been able to talk about it much, even with my buddy who was there with me that night. It's just one of those things that doesn't make any sense, and most people would think we'd been drinking or making shit up. For background, I've been hunting since I was 12. My dad took me out for my first deer season when I was just a kid, and I've been in the woods nearly every season for the past 20-something years. I know wildlife. I know the sounds animals make, how they move, what they're capable of. My hunting partner Mark has been at it even longer than me. His family has hunted in Alberta for generations. This happened on September 9th, 2016. Mark and I had planned this hunting trip for months. We were scouting locations for the upcoming season in the Blackstone Gap area northwest of Nordegg. It's beautiful country, dense forest, rolling hills, streams cutting through the landscape. We'd been there plenty of times before without incident. We'd spent the day hiking, checking game trails, and setting up trail cameras. Nothing unusual about the day at all. We got back to our campsite around 7:30, made dinner, had a couple beers, just one each. We're always careful about that in the backcountry. And by 9:30, we were sitting around the fire relaxing. The first thing I noticed was the silence. If you've spent time in the woods, you know they're never actually quiet. There's always something: wind in the trees, birds, insects, small animals moving in the underbrush. But suddenly everything just stopped. Mark noticed it too. We both kind of looked at each other, and I remember feeling the hair on my arms stand up. That's when we heard the first movement. It came from the tree line about 25 yards from our camp. Just a rustling at first, like something large moving through the underbrush. My first thought was bear. They're common enough in that area, and we always keep a clean camp to avoid attracting them. But it happens. "You hear that?" Mark whispered. I nodded and reached for my shotgun. We both had them nearby, not unusual when camping in bear country. We weren't particularly alarmed yet, just cautious. I stood up and called out, "Hey bear!" like you're supposed to do to give it fair warning we were there. The rustling stopped immediately. That's when I started getting uneasy. A bear typically either runs off when it hears humans or continues what it's doing. This was different, like whatever it was had heard me and was now deliberately being quiet. For the next half hour, we kept hearing movement circling our camp, always staying just inside the tree line where the firelight couldn't reach. It would stop for a few minutes, then start again in a different location. It was methodical, like it was sizing us up. We kept our shotguns ready and tried to track the sound, but it was too dark to see anything beyond the immediate area, lit by our fire. "What the hell is it doing?" Mark whispered after about 20 minutes of this. "That's not normal bear behavior." "Cougar, maybe?" I suggested. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right either. Cougars are stealthy. You rarely hear them at all. The movement continued, circling completely around our campsite. Whatever it was big enough to make considerable noise moving through the brush, but careful enough to stay hidden. By this point, we were both on edge. There was something deliberate about the way it was circling us that felt intelligent. Mark finally decided to fire a warning shot into the air, thinking it would scare off whatever wildlife was out there. The sound of the shotgun echoed through the trees, and for maybe 5 seconds, there was absolute silence. Then it happened. A rock, not a pebble, but a fucking boulder the size of a soccer ball, came flying out of the darkness and slammed into the ground about 3 feet from where I was sitting. It hit with enough force to embed itself partially in the dirt. I've never moved so fast in my life. Both of us jumped up, shotguns raised, scanning the tree line. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "What the fuck was that?" I hissed. Before Mark could answer, we heard trees shaking violently about 30 yards away, not like wind blowing through them, but like something was physically grabbing and rattling them. The sound was unnerving. Cracking branches and leaves rustling violently. Then another rock came sailing out of the darkness, missing Mark by inches and smashing our cooler. "Jesus Christ!" he shouted, aiming his shotgun toward where the rock had come from. We could see movement in the brush, but nothing clear, just shadows shifting in the darkness. For the next 20 minutes, we were under siege. I counted 17 rocks in total, all massive. The smallest being maybe the size of my fist, the largest bigger than my head. They came from different directions, all hurled with incredible force. One smashed our lantern, another dented the side of Mark's truck, which was parked about 15 yards from our tent. I've been in the wilderness my entire life, and there is no animal I know of that can pick up and throw rocks like that. Bears don't throw things. Cougars definitely don't. Nothing does. At one point, I caught a glimpse of movement low to the ground, maybe 40 yards out, moving between 2 trees. I raised my shotgun and was about to fire when Mark grabbed my arm. "Look," he whispered, pointing, slightly to the left of where I'd been aiming. That's when I saw it. Something stood up behind the vegetation. I couldn't make out details, just a dark silhouette against the slightly lighter background of the night sky. But it was tall. Taller than a man should be out there in the middle of nowhere, and it was definitely on 2 legs. As soon as we spotted it, it dropped back down and the rock throwing intensified. 2 more boulders slammed into our campsite in rapid succession. One hit our tent, collapsing it completely. That was it for us. Without saying a word, we both knew we had to get out of there. We kept our shotguns ready while frantically grabbing our essential gear. We didn't even bother taking down the ruined tent or gathering most of our supplies, just grabbed our backpacks, keys, and weapons. The whole time, we could hear movement all around us, branches breaking, underbrush rustling, and most disturbing of all, what sounded almost like heavy breathing from multiple directions. We made it to Mark's truck, jumped in, and he started the engine. As we were pulling away, the biggest rock of all came crashing through the trees and hit the ground right where we'd been parked, sending dirt and debris flying. If we'd been 30 seconds slower, it would have smashed through the windshield. As we sped down the rough access road, I looked back and swear I saw something moving along the tree line, keeping pace with the truck for a few seconds before falling behind. We drove straight through the night, not stopping until we hit the main highway. Neither of us said much. What was there to say? Nothing about what happened made any sense. When daylight came, we stopped at a diner in the nearest town. Sitting there with coffee cups in our shaking hands, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Could it have been people, some assholes messing with us? Mark suggested, but we both knew that was bullshit. We were miles from anywhere, on an unmarked trail that only locals knew about, and no human could have thrown rocks that size with that kind of force. We reported the incident to the local ranger station, leaving out some of the weirder details because we didn't want to sound crazy. The ranger just nodded and said there had been some unusual wildlife activity in the area recently. He advised us to stay away from Blackstone Gap for the rest of the season. Something in his expression made me think he knew more than he was saying. We went back 2 days later with a couple of Mark's cousins to retrieve the rest of our gear. Nothing was disturbed beyond the damage from that night. No tracks we could identify, no signs of what had been there. The only evidence of what happened were the rocks, still scattered around our campsite exactly where they had landed. I've spent hundreds of nights in the backcountry. I've encountered bears, cougars, wolves, and moose. Nothing has ever scared me like whatever was in those woods that night. It wasn't just the rock throwing or the tree shaking. It was the deliberate nature of it all, the intelligence behind it. Whatever was out there wanted us gone, and it knew exactly how to make that happen. I haven't been back to Blackstone Gap since, and I never will. Mark still hunts, but he won't go out alone anymore, and he carries a bigger gun. As for me, I stick to popular trails these days where there are other people around. Sometimes I lie awake at night, hearing those sounds again in my head, the heavy movement through the underbrush, the violent shaking of the trees, and what I've never told anyone until now. Right before we got in the truck, I heard what sounded like a low, rumbling growl that turned into something else at the end, something that sounded almost like words. I tell myself it was just fear playing tricks on my mind. It had to be, because the alternative is accepting that there was something out there in those woods that shouldn't exist, something that walks on two legs, can hurl boulders like they're baseballs, and worst of all, something that might have been trying to communicate in its own terrifying way. Whatever it was, it made its point. That territory belongs to it, not us. And I'm never going to dispute that claim again. Story 6. I've never really talked about what happened that night. It's been 51 years now, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My name's Marcus, and back in July of 1972, when I was 16, my buddy Tom and I went on what was supposed to be a routine backpacking trip in Trinity County, California. We were both pretty experienced hikers for our age. I'd been camping since I was 8, knew how to track animals, build fires in the rain, all that stuff. But nothing prepared me for what happened up at Granite Lake that night. We'd planned this trip for weeks, studying maps of the Trinity Alps wilderness. It was remote, beautiful country, exactly what we were looking for. My dad had taken me to other parts of the wilderness before, but we'd never been to this particular lake. It was a good 8 miles from the trailhead, which meant fewer people. Perfect. The hike in was gorgeous. We started early that morning, around 7, with clear skies and mild temperatures. But by mid-afternoon, the weather started changing. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and the air got that heavy feeling it gets before a storm. Still, we pushed on because we were already more than halfway to our destination. We reached Granite Lake around 4 in the afternoon. It was stunning, crystal clear water surrounded by granite slopes and a stand of old-growth pine and fir on the north shore. That's where we decided to set up camp, under those trees. In retrospect, that decision probably saved our lives, but it also put us through the most terrifying night of my existence. By the time we finished setting up our plastic tube tent, it was the 70s. We didn't have the fancy gear kids have today. The sky had turned an angry grey-green. We barely had time to collect firewood before the first fat raindrops started falling. We skipped building a fire and just dove into our tent with our packs and some trail mix for dinner. The storm hit hard around 7. Lightning cracked across the sky. Thunder boomed so loud it felt like the ground was shaking, and the rain came down in sheets. Our little tube tent was holding up, but just barely. Water seeped in at the corners, and we had to keep our sleeping bags in the center to stay dry. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but we were 16, so we just laughed it off, telling ghost stories and making fun of each other. By midnight, the storm was still raging, maybe even worse than before. I remember checking my watch with that little light button it had, 12:07, when we heard the first footsteps. At first, I thought it was just branches falling in the wind, but then there was a pattern to it. Step, 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 pause. Something was walking around out there, something big. "You hear that?" Tom whispered. I nodded, then realized he couldn't see me in the dark. "Yeah, probably just a deer." But I knew it wasn't a deer. The footfalls were too heavy, too deliberate. And there was something else. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Whatever it was walking on 2 legs, not 4. "Bears don't walk like that," Tom said, reading my mind. His voice had that tight quality that comes with real fear. "No, they don't." We both went quiet, straining to hear over the rain and thunder. The footsteps continued, circling our campsite. I could tell exactly where it was. First behind us, then to our right, then in front of our tent, then to our left. A complete circle, moving slowly but surely. I'd grown up tracking deer and even bears with my dad. I knew what different animals sounded like when they moved through the forest. Deer are light and quick. Bears are heavy and usually noisy, snapping twigs and rustling brush. Mountain lions are nearly silent. But this was different. It was heavy enough to snap branches. I could hear them breaking under its weight, but it moved with purpose. And it was definitely bipedal, 2 legs, like a human, but not. "What the hell is it?" Tom whispered. I didn't answer because I didn't know. And that scared me more than anything. I didn't know what was out there. Then it screamed. Jesus Christ, that sound. It's been 5 decades, and I can still hear it perfectly in my head. It started low, almost like a moan, then rose to this high-pitched wail that cut through the storm noise like it wasn't even there. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized, not a mountain lion. Their screams are terrifying but different. Not a bear or a wolf or a coyote. It was almost human, but impossibly loud and filled with this emotion I couldn't name. Rage, pain, hunger, whatever it was, it froze my blood. Tom grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. "What the fuck was that?" His voice was barely audible. "I don't know." My mouth was so dry I could barely speak. The footsteps had stopped when it screamed, but now they started again, faster this time. It was moving quickly around our campsite, still in a circle but tightening, getting closer with each pass. I could hear branches snapping, not little twigs, but branches at least an inch thick. Whatever this thing was, it had some serious weight to it. "Should we run?" Tom asked. "Run where?" I said. We were in the middle of nowhere, in a violent thunderstorm, at midnight. The nearest help was miles away. We'd get lost or struck by lightning, and I think it's faster than us. I reached for my pack and pulled out my hunting knife. It was a good blade, about 7 inches long, razor sharp, but I remember thinking how pathetically inadequate it seemed against whatever was out there. Another scream, this one closer, maybe 20 feet away, then another from the opposite direction, as if it had somehow teleported across our campsite. But that wasn't possible, unless... "You think there's more than one?" Tom's voice cracked. The thought hadn't occurred to me, and it made my stomach drop. One was terrifying enough, but multiple. I listened harder, trying to separate the sounds, but no, the footsteps had a rhythm to them, a specific cadence. It was just one creature circling us relentlessly. Around 1 in the morning, it got bolder. The footsteps came closer, maybe 15 feet from our tent, then 10. I could hear its breathing now, deep, ragged breaths that sounded almost like panting, but with an odd catch to them. Not quite human, not quite animal. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating our tent, and for a split second, I saw a silhouette against the tent wall. Something tall was standing just outside. In that flash of light, I could make out broad shoulders, a large head, arms that hung lower than a human's would. Then darkness again. Tom saw it too. He didn't say anything, but his breathing got faster, almost hyperventilating. I put my hand on his shoulder, trying to keep him calm, while my own heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. The thing outside moved again, circling back around. For the next hour, it continued this pattern, circling, screaming occasionally, sometimes coming close enough that I swear I could feel its presence just inches away through the thin plastic of our tent, other times retreating to the edge of the trees. But it never left. The storm didn't let up either. If anything, it intensified. The lightning was constant now, thunder cracking immediately after each flash. The rain hammered down so hard it sounded like thousands of fingers tapping on our tent. Between the storm and the creature, sleep was impossible. We just sat there, backs pressed together, knives in hand, listening. Around 3 in the morning, something changed. The creature's screams became more frequent, more agitated. It started hitting things. I could hear impacts against tree trunks, like it was striking them with massive force. Branches broke. Stones clattered down the granite slopes nearby. It was having some kind of fit. Then it charged our tent. I heard it coming, heavy footsteps suddenly accelerating, heading straight for us. Tom and I both braced ourselves, knives ready, though what good they would have done I don't know. At the last second, the creature veered off, missing our tent by what felt like inches. The ground shook with the impact of its footfalls as it passed. It did this 3 more times over the next hour, charging at our tent only to veer away at the last moment. Was it toying with us? Testing us? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that we were completely at its mercy, and for some reason, it was choosing not to attack directly. By 4:30 in the morning, I was physically sick from fear. My muscles ached from being tensed for so long. My head pounded. Tom wasn't doing any better. He'd thrown up once already from stress. But we didn't dare move from that tent. Outside was death. We were both sure of it. Around 5, the first hint of dawn appeared. Not actual light yet, but that subtle shift in the blackness that tells you night is almost over. The storm had finally started to ease. The thunder now distant, the rain reduced to a steady drizzle, and the creature, it seemed to sense the coming day. Its circles got wider again, its screams less frequent. By 5:30, I could only hear it far off among the trees, moving away from us. When actual daylight finally came around 6, the forest was silent, except for the light rain. No footsteps, no screams, nothing. We waited another hour before we dared to unzip the tent. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the zipper. When we finally got out, the forest looked normal, wet, storm-damaged, but normal. The air smelled clean from the rain, with that pine scent that usually made me feel at peace. Not that day. Tom and I searched the area for tracks, but the ground around our campsite was mostly granite with patches of pine needles. The rain had washed away any clear impressions. We found broken branches, big ones, some as thick as my wrist, snapped clean through. But that could have been from the storm. The only concrete evidence was a pine tree about 15 feet from our tent that had deep gouges in its trunk, around 7 feet off the ground. They looked like claw marks, but larger and deeper than any bear scratches I'd ever seen. We didn't talk much as we packed up. There was an unspoken agreement between us to get the hell out of there as fast as possible. We skipped breakfast, didn't even bother to filter water. We just stuffed everything into our packs, soaking wet, and started hiking out. It should have taken us at least 5 hours to get back to the trailhead. We did it in 3, practically running downhill, not stopping once. We didn't speak about what happened until we were in my dad's truck, driving home. "What do you think it was?" Tom finally asked as we hit the paved road. "I don't know," I said. And I still don't, not really. I've spent 5 decades trying to make sense of that night. I've read about every known animal in the Trinity Alps. I've talked to forest rangers, local hunters, even some of the Native American elders from the area. I've gone back to the Trinity Alps hundreds of times since then. Over 300 trips, actually. I love those mountains. But I've never gone back to Granite Lake. Never will. Some people I've told think it was a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Others suggest it was just a bear behaving strangely because of the storm. A few have suggested it was another hiker trying to scare us. But none of those explanations fit what we experienced. All I know for certain is that something was out there that night. Something that walked on 2 legs, screamed with an almost human voice, and was powerful enough to snap thick branches like twigs. Something that, for whatever reason, decided not to harm us, even though it clearly could have. And sometimes, late at night when a storm is raging outside, I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear those heavy footsteps circling my house, getting closer and closer with each pass. Story 7. I've been a hunter my whole life. I grew up in Florida, been shooting since I was 8, and spent more time in the woods than most people spend in shopping malls. Nothing ever really scared me out there. Until November 2016. I hunt mostly on public land. This particular spot was a massive 7,000-acre wildlife management area in central Florida. Not gonna name it exactly, but locals know it as one of the wildest, nastiest swamps in the state. It's the kind of place where you can walk half a mile in and feel like you're the first human to ever set foot there. That day started like any other hunt. I got to my spot around 2 in the afternoon, planning to be up in my stand by 3. The weather was perfect, about 65 degrees, slight breeze, partly cloudy. I parked my old F-150 at a pull-off where the dirt road ends, grabbed my gear, and headed in. I was after hogs that day. They'd been tearing up everything, and the state basically lets you shoot as many as you want. I was using my climber stand. It's this portable tree stand that you can strap to any decent-sized tree and shimmy up to whatever height you want. I had a spot about half a mile in that I'd scouted earlier that week. It was this little clearing surrounded by cypress and oak, with a marshy area to the north where the hogs had been rooting. Perfect ambush spot. The walk-in was tough as always. Anyone who's hunted Florida swamps knows what I'm talking about. The ground is never really solid. Every step, you're either ankle-deep in black muck or trying not to trip over cypress knees. I was sweating like crazy by the time I reached my tree, even though the temperature was mild. I got my stand set up about 15 feet high in this big oak tree with good visibility of the clearing. The marsh was about 70 yards to my north, and I had clear shooting lanes in every direction. I settled in around 3:30, loaded my .308, and just started waiting. For the first hour, nothing happened. Just the usual swamp sounds, frogs, birds, the occasional splash from something dropping into water. The sun was starting to get lower, casting these long shadows across the clearing. I was taking it all in, enjoying the quiet. Around 5 o'clock, I spotted movement to the north. A small group of white-tailed does, maybe 4 or 5 of them, emerged from the tree line and started picking their way across the marsh. This wasn't unusual. I wasn't hunting deer that day, but I always enjoy watching them. They were calm, feeding contentedly, stopping every few steps to look around like deer do. The does slowly made their way closer to my position, eventually getting within about 20 yards of my tree. It was dead quiet by this point, that special kind of silence you only get in the woods when the day creatures are settling down and the night creatures haven't woken up yet. I was barely breathing, not wanting to spook them. That's when it happened. From somewhere behind me, south of my position, came the most horrifying sound I've ever heard in my life. It was like a groan, but not human, not animal either, at least not any animal I've ever heard. It was deep, starting low and then rising in pitch and volume until it was so loud I could feel it vibrating in my chest. It was like somebody was running a giant's larynx through a bullhorn. The deer, Jesus, the deer went from calm to absolute panic in a split second. Their tails tucked flat against their bodies, not just down, but flat, which I'd never seen before. They bolted, north faster than I've ever seen deer move, literally bouncing off trees in their panic. Something about the way they ran was wrong. They weren't just startled, they were in absolute terror. My blood went cold. Whatever made that sound was behind me, and it wasn't a hog or a bear or a panther. I knew every sound those animals make. This was something else. I immediately decided the hunt was over. I secured my rifle to my harness and started the process of getting down from my stand. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the mechanisms. It was getting dark fast. The sun was already below the tree line, and in the swamp, darkness comes quick. By the time my boots hit the ground, it was almost full dark. I clicked on my headlamp, grabbed my rifle, and started moving as quickly and quietly as possible toward the trail that would lead back to my truck. I kept telling myself it was probably just some weird sound that echoed strangely, or maybe another hunter playing a prank. I'd gone maybe 50 yards when I heard it again. That same groaning sound from behind me, but closer now. My skin crawled, and the hair on my neck stood straight up. Whatever it was following me. I picked up my pace, moving as fast as I dared in the darkness. The beam of my headlamp bounced wildly across the trail as I half-jogged through the swamp. Then something stopped me dead in my tracks. From ahead of me, north in the direction I was heading, came another sound, different from the first, but somehow obviously related. It was higher pitched, almost like a whoop or a call. Something was answering the creature behind me. That's when I realized I was surrounded. There was something behind me, something in front of me, and only swamp on either side. I'm not ashamed to say I panicked. I turned off my headlamp and stood perfectly still, trying to control my breathing. My mind was racing through options. I couldn't go forward or backward. East would take me deeper into the swamp. That left west, through water. There was a creek about 20 yards to my west. I knew if I crossed it, I could circle northwest and eventually hit the dirt road about a quarter-mile north of where I'd parked. It would be a longer route back, but away from whatever was calling in the darkness. I moved as silently as possible toward the creek, wincing every time a twig snapped under my boots. When I reached the water, I didn't hesitate. I waded in, holding my rifle above my head. The water was chest-deep and cold as hell. The bottom was pure muck that tried to suck my boots off with every step. I crossed the creek and kept moving west for about 100 yards before turning northwest. I was soaked, freezing, and completely terrified. Every few minutes I'd hear one of those calls, sometimes the deep groan, sometimes the higher whoop, and each time they seemed to be tracking me, moving parallel to my position. I don't know how long I walked. It felt like hours. I was completely disoriented, using only the stars to keep my general direction. Finally, I saw the reflective markers on the dirt road through the trees. I broke into a run, no longer caring about noise. When I reached my truck, I fumbled with my keys, dropped them in the mud, found them, and finally got the door open. I threw my rifle in, jumped in the cab, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. When the engine roared to life, I felt a wave of relief so intense I almost cried. That's when I saw it in my headlights. On the passenger side of my truck, on the camper topper over the bed, was a handprint, not a human handprint. This thing was enormous, had to be at least twice the size of my hand. And it wasn't just a dusty print. It was greasy, like whatever left it had some kind of oil on its skin. I threw the truck in reverse, spun around, and got the hell out of there, driving way too fast on that bumpy dirt road. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. I kept hearing those sounds in my head. 4 days later, I went back. I know that sounds crazy, but I had left about $2,000 worth of hunting gear at my stand. I wasn't going alone, though. I brought my buddy Mike, and we were both armed to the teeth. I had my .308 and my Glock. Mike brought his AR-15. We went in mid-morning, figuring whatever was out there would be less active in daylight. The walk-in was tense but uneventful. As we approached where I'd left the trail that night, Mike pointed something out. Tracks, not deer tracks or hog tracks. These were huge, deep impressions in the soft ground. They were roughly foot-shaped but massive, easily 15 inches long, and the stride between them was incredible. We measured at least 45 to 50 inches between steps. Whatever made these was huge and could cover ground fast. We followed the trail to my tree stand. Everything was still there, untouched. But around the base of the tree were 2 sets of those same tracks, converging from different directions. Just like the calls I'd heard, they had approached from 2 sides. We grabbed my gear and got out of there as fast as we could, but we didn't go back the same way. Mike wanted to check out another area where he'd found hog sign recently. It was on our way back, but required a slight detour. That's where we found the pig. What was left of it anyway. It was a 40-pounder, not huge, but what had been done to it. I've been hunting my whole life. I've seen what bears do to carcasses, what coyotes and panthers do. This was different. This pig had been torn apart, not eaten, torn apart. Its neck was twisted completely around, legs pulled off, hide torn open. But very little had actually been consumed. It was like whatever killed it did it for sport or out of anger. I never went back to that spot, never will. I've never told this story publicly before now because I know how it sounds. But I know what I experienced. I know what I heard. I know what I saw. I've spent countless hours researching since then. I've read about Bigfoot encounters, listened to recordings of supposed Bigfoot calls. What I heard that night matches many of the descriptions, the deep whoops, the call and response between multiple creatures. People can believe what they want, but those 7,000 acres belong to whatever lives in there, and I'm happy to let them keep it. Story 8. I still don't know what to make of what happened at our place in Perry Township back in 2015. My husband John and I have tried to explain it away, but some things just don't make sense no matter how you look at them. It started that February, one of those brutally cold Ohio winters where everything freezes solid. We'd been living in our house for about 3 years by then. It sits on about 2 acres, with woods backing up to a ravine behind the property. Nice place, quiet neighborhood, good for raising our kids. At least that's what we thought. That night, John and I had gone to the rental store to pick up some equipment for a home project. It was already dark when we got back, probably around 7:30. As we were unloading the truck, John accidentally knocked over a box of screws onto the snow-covered driveway. "Damn it," he muttered, bending down with the flashlight to look for them. I was about to go inside when I heard him call me over. "Heather, come look at this." I trudged through the snow, annoyed because it was freezing and I wanted to get inside. "What is it?" "Look at this," he said, pointing the flashlight beam at the snow about 10 feet from our driveway. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I realized it was a footprint. A massive footprint. We both just stood there, staring at it, not saying anything for a good minute. That's not normal," I finally said. John knelt down beside it, placing his hand next to it for scale. The print was at least 21 centimeters long. We measured it later. It wasn't like any animal track I'd ever seen. It had 5 distinct toe impressions, almost human-like, but much larger and wider than any human foot I'd ever seen. "Let's check if there are more," John said, his voice tight. We followed with the flashlight and found a trail of these enormous prints. They came from the woods at the edge of our property, crossed our backyard, and then circled around toward our shed before heading back into the woods. Whatever made them had been walking around our house while we were gone. That night, I barely slept. I kept getting up to look out the windows, convinced I'd see something moving out there in the darkness. John called the local sheriff's department the next morning, but by the time a deputy came out, our kids had already been outside playing and had trampled all over the yard. The prints were ruined. The deputy looked at us like we were crazy, wrote something in his notebook, and left. "Great," John said. "Now we look like the neighborhood nutcases." But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. Our motion detector lights would go on in the middle of the night, but when we looked out, there was never anything there. At least, nothing we could see. Our cat started refusing to go outside, which was weird because she'd always been an indoor-outdoor cat. Then there was the smell. God, that smell. I first noticed it one morning when I went to get the mail. This putrid, rotting odor that made me gag. Like something had died, but worse. It was concentrated around the side of the house near our outdoor cabinet where we kept the cat food. When I opened it, I found the bag torn open and most of the food gone. The weird thing was, the cabinet door had one of those child-proof latches that you have to push in a certain way to open. No raccoon or opossum could have figured that out. One night in early March, I got up to use the bathroom around 3 in the morning. I nearly had a heart attack when I walked in and found the toilet lid up. Now, I know that doesn't sound scary, but John is meticulous about putting the lid down. It's actually one of his pet peeves. And our kids were at my mom's that night. Someone or something had been inside our house. I shook John awake, terrified. "Someone's been in the house," I whispered. He jumped up, grabbed the baseball bat we keep under the bed, and we checked every room, closet, and corner. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing was missing, just the toilet lid left up. The next day, John installed more security cameras and changed all the locks. We were both on edge, jumping at every little sound. That's when we found the rabbits. There were 3 of them, laid out in a row at the edge of our property, where the yard meets the woods. They weren't torn apart or bloody, they just looked deflated somehow, like all the life had been sucked out of them. No visible wounds, no puncture marks, just dead, with their eyes wide open in what looked like terror. John buried them deep in the yard, and we didn't tell the kids. I couldn't take it anymore, so I went to talk to our nearest neighbor, Sean Gregg. His property adjoins ours on the east side, and he's lived there since the early 90s. I figured if anyone knew anything weird about the area, it would be him. Sean invited me in for coffee, and I could tell by his face when I started describing the footprints that he knew something. He'd seen them too. He told me he'd been experiencing strange things on his property for over 20 years. He'd hear what sounded like someone crying for help from the ravine behind his house, but when he'd go investigate, there was never anyone there. "I found footprints like you're describing back in '97, he said, his hands shaking slightly as he held his coffee mug. "Big as my forearm they were. 5 toes, just like a person's, but not right, not human." He told me about a family who had rented his trailer a few years back. They'd been sitting outside one evening when they saw a pair of glowing eyes approaching them from the pasture. Their dog, which was normally fearless, had bolted inside, whimpering and refusing to come out. The family thought it was a horse at first, but then realized whatever it was had climbed on top of the trailer and was sitting there. They'd fled inside and stayed there until morning. The renters moved out the following week. As Sean talked, I felt a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just in our heads. Something was out there, something that had been in the area for years. When I got home, I told John everything Sean had said. We decided to set up trail cameras in addition to our security cameras, hoping to catch whatever it was on film. For a few days, nothing happened. The motion lights would occasionally trigger, but the cameras never showed anything. Then, one night in late March, all hell broke loose. It was around 2 in the morning when our bedroom filled with the blaring sound of our security system. All the motion detectors had triggered at once: front yard, backyard, side yard. John jumped out of bed and ran to the security panel while I checked on the kids. "Stay in your rooms and keep the doors locked," I shouted to them as I ran down the hall. I joined John at the monitor that showed feeds from all our cameras. What we saw made my blood run cold. The yard was empty, but the bushes at the edge of the woods were swaying violently, as if something large was moving through them. And the motion lights kept triggering in sequence, like something was circling our house, moving too fast for the cameras to catch. "I'm calling 911, I said, reaching for my phone. John grabbed his gun from the safe, he's a licensed owner, and moved toward the back door. "Don't you dare go out there," I hissed. Already dialing. Before I could hit call, we heard it. A sound I still can't properly describe, like a cross between a woman screaming and an animal in pain, but deeper, more guttural. It seemed to come from right outside our living room window, not 10 feet from where we stood. Our German shepherd, Max, who normally barks at everything, was cowering under the dining room table, whining. Then the power went out. In the sudden darkness, I could hear John breathing heavily beside me. The emergency lights on our security system cast an eerie blue glow across the room. Outside, the motion lights had died with the power outage, leaving the yard in complete darkness. "The kids," John whispered, and we both raced upstairs in the dark. We gathered our children into our bedroom, barricaded the door with a dresser, and huddled together on the bed. I had my phone ready to call for help, but then I realized there was no signal. Nothing. Not even one bar. For what felt like hours, we sat there in the dark, listening. The sounds outside got worse, crashing noises from the yard, scratching at the siding of the house, and that awful scream howl that made my skin crawl. Max had followed us upstairs and was pressed against my leg, trembling. Then came the worst part. Heavy, deliberate footsteps on our front porch. Slow, like whatever it was had all the time in the world. The front door handle jiggled, then the back door, then the side door off the kitchen. Something was trying every entrance to our house. Our bedroom window faced the front yard, and I made the mistake of peeking through the blinds. What I saw still haunts my nightmares. Just for a second, illuminated by the moonlight, was a tall, dark figure standing in our yard, looking up at our window. It wasn't human. The proportions were all wrong. The arms too long, the shoulders too wide, and the eyes, they reflected the moonlight like an animal's, but they were set in what seemed like a human-like face. I jerked back from the window, unable to breathe. John pulled me close, and I buried my face against his chest so the kids wouldn't see how terrified I was. The scratching moved to the walls directly outside our bedroom. It sounded like massive claws dragging slowly down the siding. Scrape, 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 right behind where we were sitting. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe an hour, maybe 3. Eventually the sound stopped. The power flickered back on around 5 in the morning. When dawn finally came, we cautiously went downstairs. The yard was a mess. Our grill had been knocked over, patio furniture scattered. Deep grooves were carved into the wooden siding of the house. 4 parallel lines like claw marks, too high up for any normal animal to reach. And there were those footprints again, all around the house, in the mud left by melting snow. But the most disturbing thing was found in our backyard. Another dead rabbit, placed in the center of the yard, its body completely intact but somehow drained of life. And beside it, carefully arranged, was our cat's collar. Our cat that we hadn't seen for 2 days. We never found our cat. We called the police, who once again treated us like we were overreacting to some ordinary vandalism. We showed them the claw marks, the footprints, described the sounds, but they just wrote it down with bored expressions. One officer suggested it was probably teenagers playing pranks, combined with some coyotes or a bear. A bear in central Ohio. That can work door handles and turn off power. We stayed with my parents for a week after that, but eventually had to return home. The incidents became less frequent, but never stopped entirely. Every few weeks, something would happen. More footprints, the smell returning, motion detectors triggering. We installed more cameras, better locks, brighter lights. Nothing ever showed up clearly on camera, just blurry movements at the edge of the frame, or cameras that mysteriously stopped working for short periods. Sean told us that spring that he'd been hearing the crying sounds from the ravine again, more frequently than before. It's been years now, and we still don't know what was stalking our property that winter. We've researched local legends, cryptids, everything we could think of. Nothing fits exactly. The kids are older now and have mostly forgotten or convinced themselves it was all some elaborate game their parents were playing. But I know what I saw standing in my yard that night. I know what made those footprints in the snow, and sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind blows through the trees behind our house, I hear that awful scream again, and I know it's still out there, watching and waiting. We're planning to move next year. I don't care if we take a loss on the house. Some things aren't worth the risk, but part of me wonders if whatever this thing is might follow us, and that terrifies me more than anything. Story 9. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family and the other kids who were there. I'm 58 now, but I can still remember that day like it was yesterday. Some things just burn themselves into your memory, you know? This happened back in 1969. I was 12 years old, living in a rural part of Michigan where houses were spread far apart and most roads weren't even paved. Every day after school, me, my 9-year-old sister Sarah, and 4 other neighborhood kids had to walk about 3/4 of a mile from our bus stop to get home. It was just normal for us back then. No helicopter parents, no cell phones, just a bunch of kids walking home together along this remote gravel road. That particular day was in early October. The weather was getting cooler, but it wasn't cold yet. I remember because I was wearing my favorite blue jacket, the one my mom had bought me for my birthday that summer. It was a bit big on me, but I refused to get a smaller one because I wanted to grow into it. Kids, right? Anyway, we'd gotten off the bus around 3:30 in the afternoon. The sun was still up, but it was that kind of slanted autumn light that makes everything look a bit golden. Me and Sarah were walking with the Johnson kids, there were 3 of them, and Tommy Miller from the farm down the road. We were all just talking about normal kid stuff, homework, who got in trouble at school, whose mom made the best cookies. I was in the middle of telling everyone about Mrs. Peterson giving Billy Stevens detention for putting a frog in her desk drawer when something caught my eye. I still don't know what made me turn my head. It wasn't a sound, at least I don't think it was. It was more like, you know when you feel someone watching you? That weird, prickly feeling on the back of your neck? It was something like that. When I turned to look, I froze. I mean completely froze. My whole body just locked up. There was this thing coming out of the roadside ditch. For context, these weren't little shallow ditches. They were deep, like 6 or 7 feet down. Because they had to handle the spring runoff from the hills, the county never maintained them properly, so they were always overgrown with weeds and small bushes. This thing was climbing out of the ditch on all 4s at first. I remember thinking it looked like a bear for a split second, but then my brain caught up with my eyes, and I realized it was all wrong for a bear. It was covered in hair, not fur, but hair. Kind of a dirty reddish-brown color. And it moved wrong, like it wasn't used to being on all 4s. When it reached the edge of the ditch, it stood up, just stood right up on 2 legs like a person. But it wasn't a person. No way. It was completely covered in that hair from head to toe. I couldn't see its face clearly. I don't know if it was turned away or if the hair was covering it, but I could tell it was looking around. "What is that?" I whispered. I didn't even realize I'd spoken until Sarah grabbed my arm. "Danny, what is it?" she asked me, her voice all high and scared. The other kids had stopped walking and were staring too. Tommy dropped his lunchbox, and the clatter seemed impossibly loud in that moment. The thing turned its head toward us. I swear to God, time just slowed down. It felt like we were all stuck in molasses. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then it started walking, not lumbering or shuffling like you'd expect something that big and hairy to move. It walked with purpose, almost like a person, but with longer strides. It took maybe 3 or 4 steps across the gravel road, and then, this is the part that still gives me nightmares, it just leaped over the opposite ditch in a single bound. The ditch was at least 6 feet wide, and this thing cleared it like it was nothing. Then it put one hand on top of the wooden fence on the other side, a fence that was about 5 feet high, meant to keep in the Hendersons' ponies, and vaulted over it with this fluid, graceful motion that no human could pull off. Once it was over the fence, it started running across the open field. And when I say running, I mean running. The Hendersons had 2 ponies that usually grazed in that field, and they both took off galloping when they saw this thing. But it was faster. It was outrunning those ponies on 2 legs, moving in this weird, bouncy way that made the hair on my arms stand up. Within seconds, it had crossed the entire field and disappeared into the tree line on the far side. The whole encounter probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like forever. For a few seconds after it vanished, none of us moved or spoke. Then Sarah started crying, and Tommy's little brother joined in. The oldest Johnson kid, Mike, kept saying, "What the hell was that?" over and over. I remember feeling responsible somehow, like as the oldest I should know what to do. But I was just as terrified as they were. "Let's go," I finally said, grabbing Sarah's hand. "We need to get home." We practically ran the rest of the way, all of us bunched together like a herd of scared rabbits. Every noise made us jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. When we reached our driveway, Sarah and I said quick goodbyes to the others, then sprinted to our house. Our mom was in the kitchen making dinner when we burst through the door, both of us out of breath and wide-eyed. "What on earth is wrong with you two?" she asked, looking up from the potatoes she was peeling. I tried to explain what we'd seen, but the words came tumbling out in a jumbled mess. Sarah kept interrupting with her own details, and soon we were talking over each other, getting louder and more worked up. Mom made us sit down, take a breath, and tell her one at a time. I went first, trying my best to describe what I'd seen without sounding crazy. When I finished, she looked concerned but not convinced. "Are you sure it wasn't just a bear?" she asked. "Mom, it wasn't a bear," I insisted. "Bears don't stand up and walk like people. They don't jump over fences like that. And they definitely don't outrun ponies." Sarah backed me up, adding details I'd forgotten in my rush, like how the thing's arms had seemed longer than a person's, and how its movements were both awkward and graceful at the same time. Mom didn't know what to make of it. She wasn't dismissing us outright, but I could tell she thought we were exaggerating or had let our imaginations run wild. Still, she promised to tell Dad when he got home from work. Dad got home around 6. He listened to our story with a serious expression, asking questions about exactly where we'd seen the thing and which direction it had gone. Unlike Mom, he seemed to believe that we'd seen something, even if he wasn't sure what. After dinner, he grabbed his flashlight and his hunting rifle and went out to look around. I begged to go with him, but he refused, telling me to stay with Mom and Sarah. I watched from the window as his flashlight beam moved along the road, disappearing and reappearing between the trees. He came back about an hour later, looking puzzled. "I checked the spot where you said you saw it cross the road," he told me. "Ground's pretty sandy there, but I couldn't find any tracks that looked unusual." Could have been washed out by the wind, though. The next day at school, the other kids and I huddled together at lunch, comparing notes on what we'd seen. We all described the same thing, a hair-covered creature that moved with impossible speed and agility. Tommy swore he'd seen glowing red eyes, but none of the rest of us had noticed that, and I think he was just trying to make the story scarier. For weeks afterward, we walked home in a tight group, jumping at every sound. Eventually, though, the fear faded. Kids are resilient that way, I guess. But we never walked that stretch of road alone if we could help it. Here's the thing, at that time, I'd never heard of Bigfoot. This was 1969, remember, before Bigfoot was a common part of popular culture. I didn't have a name for what I'd seen, no framework to understand it. I just knew it was something that shouldn't exist. For years, I wondered about that creature. As I got older, I started to doubt my own memory. Maybe it had been a bear. Maybe we'd all scared ourselves into seeing something that wasn't really there. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. Then, about 20 years later, this would have been around 1989, I was flipping through channels one night when I came across a documentary about Bigfoot sightings. They showed a recreation of a Bigfoot walking, and I felt that same frozen feeling I'd experienced as a kid. The way it moved, the proportions, the hair. It was eerily similar to what I'd seen that day. I called Sarah the next morning. She was living in Ohio by then, married with 2 kids of her own. "Do you remember that thing we saw walking home from the bus stop when we were kids?" I asked her. There was a long pause on the line. "I still have nightmares about it sometimes," she finally said, her voice quiet. "Why?" I told her about the documentary, about how what they'd shown looked just like our creature. "I looked it up at the library," I told her. "There have been Bigfoot sightings in Michigan going back decades." Sarah didn't say anything for a while. Then, "It wasn't as tall as they described Bigfoot, though. The one we saw was maybe 6 feet, tops." She was right. Most Bigfoot reports describe a creature 7 to 8 feet tall. Ours had been shorter, maybe 5.5 to 6.5 feet. But everything else fit. The hair covering its body, the way it moved, the incredible speed and strength. Over the years, I've read everything I could find about Bigfoot sightings. Some reports mention juvenile Bigfoots, smaller than the adults. Maybe that's what we saw, or maybe it was something else entirely. I've never gone public with this story before. I've never contacted any of those Bigfoot research groups or gone on TV, partly because I don't want the attention, but mostly because I'm still not sure what we saw that day. All I know is that it was real, it was terrifying, and it changed how I see the world. Sometimes, when I'm driving down a wooded road at dusk, I catch myself scanning the ditches, half expecting to see that hair-covered figure rise up again. And even now, all these years later, the thought makes my heart race and my palms sweat. Whatever it was, it's still out there, or others like it, moving through the woods, crossing lonely roads when they think no one is watching. But sometimes, people are watching, and some of us can never forget what we've seen. Story 10. I've been holding this in for nearly 60 years now, and I think it's finally time I put it down somewhere. My hands are shaking just typing this out. I'm 75 years old now, but I swear the memory is as fresh as if it happened yesterday. It was October of 1963. I was 16 then, just a skinny kid from Tyler, Texas with more confidence than sense. Me and 4 of my buddies, Tommy, Ray, Bobby and Donnie, we'd been coon hunting for a couple years by then. We weren't exactly experts, but we knew enough to get by. And we had 3 good hunting dogs. Blue, a blue tick hound that belonged to my family, and Ranger and Scout, who were Tommy's dad's redbone hounds. That particular night started like any other hunt. We piled into Donnie's beat-up Ford pickup around 7 in the evening and headed out to Marlow Bottom, south of Tyler. It was a good spot for coons, lots of creeks and wooded areas where they'd come out to feed at night. The air had that fall crispness to it, just cool enough that you could see your breath if you exhaled hard. We parked off the old logging road about a mile in, unloaded the dogs and grabbed our gear. Each of us had a flashlight. Tommy and Ray carried lanterns too. I had my dad's .22 rifle, Bobby had a .410 shotgun, and the other guys carried various small caliber rifles. Nothing fancy, just enough to take down a raccoon. Looking back, I thank God we weren't carrying anything more powerful. I remember joking around as we let the dogs off their leads. Blue took off first, nose to the ground, with Ranger and Scout right behind him. We followed at a distance, keeping their movements in our ears more than our eyes. The moon was just a sliver that night, and the pines made it even darker, our flashlight beams cutting thin paths through the blackness. For about an hour, it was just a normal hunt. The dogs would get excited about something, then lose the trail. We'd wander through the woods, talking about school, girls, football, normal teenage stuff. I remember Tommy was bragging about asking Susan Miller to the homecoming dance. Then the dogs' barking changed. Any hunter knows what I'm talking about. There's a different tone when they've actually cornered something versus when they're just on a trail. This was the real deal. That excited, frantic barking that told us they had something treed or cornered. "They got one!" Bobby shouted, already starting to jog in the direction of the barking. We all picked up our pace, following the sound. The dogs were about a quarter-mile ahead of us, down in a small gully near the creek. We were all excited, joking and laughing as we made our way toward them. The barking got louder as we got closer, and I remember feeling that familiar rush of anticipation. But then something changed. The dog's barking suddenly shifted. It wasn't the excited, "we've got something" bark anymore. It became more cautious, almost fearful. And then, just as we approached the edge of the gully, the barking stopped completely. That should have been our first warning. Those dogs never went quiet on a hunt. Never. "What's wrong with them?" Ray whispered, his voice suddenly tense. We slowed our approach. Flashlights pointed down into the gully. I could see the dogs, all three of them, standing stock still, facing something in the shadows that our lights hadn't reached yet. "Shine your light over there," I said to Tommy, who had the brightest lantern. When he raised that lantern and the light flooded the far side of the gully, my entire world changed forever. What stood there wasn't a raccoon. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before or could even comprehend at that moment. It was tall, so damn tall. Even hunched over like it was, it had to be 7 or 8 feet, covered in thick reddish-brown fur that looked matted in places. Its arms were impossibly long, hanging almost to its knees, and they were moving. Not in a normal way, but flailing, like it was agitated or trying to scare off the dogs. But it was the face that froze my blood. Our lights only caught glimpses as it moved, but what I saw was something between an ape and a man, with deep-set eyes that reflected our lights like a deer's would. The mouth was open, showing teeth that looked too big, too sharp. And then it made a sound. God, that sound. It started as this low, guttural howl that rose in pitch until it was almost a scream, but not human, not even close to human. It was primal, raw, like something from a world much older than ours. My skin crawled and the hair on my arms stood straight up. The dogs, these fearless hunting hounds that would take on anything, were completely silent now, frozen in place. We all stood there, 5 teenage boys face to face with something impossible, our minds unable to process what we were seeing. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My fingers gripped my rifle so tight they went numb, but I couldn't even think about raising it. Bobby was the first to react. He was always the jumpy one of our group. I heard him whisper "Jesus Christ" under his breath, and then his shotgun went off with a deafening crack that echoed through the trees. I don't know if he hit it. I don't think he did. But what happened next is something that's haunted my nightmares for 6 decades. The creature dropped to all fours and let out a growl that wasn't just heard. It was felt. It rumbled through the ground, up through my boots, into my chest. It was so deep, so powerful that I swear it shook the leaves on the trees. The dogs broke from their trance and scattered, yelping in terror, bolting past us and up the hill behind us. And then it moved. Something that big shouldn't be able to move that fast. It lunged forward, still on all fours, covering half the distance between us in what seemed like a single bound. I don't remember deciding to run. I don't remember turning around. But suddenly I was sprinting through the woods, branches whipping my face, roots trying to trip me with every step. I could hear the others crashing through, the brush around me. Someone was sobbing, might have been me. I dropped my rifle, I didn't care. All I wanted was to get away. I remember Ray falling behind me, hitting the ground hard. I grabbed his arm without slowing, practically dragging him to his feet. "Go, go, go!" I was screaming, though I don't remember making the decision to speak. We ran without direction at first, pure panic driving us forward. Then Bobby started yelling, "The truck! Get to the truck!" And we somehow oriented ourselves following his lead. I kept expecting to feel massive hands grab me from behind. Every snapping twig behind us sounded like it was right on our heels. I've never run so hard in my life, before or since. My lungs were burning, my legs were on fire, but stopping wasn't an option. When we finally broke through the tree line and saw Donnie's truck sitting there in the moonlight, it was like seeing the gates of heaven. Tommy reached it first, yanking the door open and diving in. The rest of us piled in after him, a tangle of limbs and gasping breath. "Keys! Where are the fucking keys?" Donnie was patting his pockets frantically. "In the ignition! They're in the ignition!" Ray screamed. Donnie lunged for the steering wheel, twisting the key. The engine sputtered once, twice. Those seconds felt like years before roaring to life. He threw it in reverse, tires spinning in the dirt before catching, and we shot backward down the logging road. No one spoke as we tore out of there, the truck bouncing violently over every rut and hole. We were all just trying to breathe, to process what had happened. I was in the middle of the bench seat, squeezed between Tommy and Ray, and I could feel them both trembling. Or maybe that was me. It wasn't until we hit the paved road that Bobby finally broke the silence from the truck bed where he and Donnie's brother were riding. "What the hell was that thing?" he shouted through the back window, his voice cracking. No one answered. No one had an answer. We drove straight to my house because it was closest, parked in my driveway with the headlights still on, just sat there, none of us moving or speaking for what felt like forever. "We don't tell anybody about this," Tommy finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody would believe us anyway." We all nodded in agreement. What could we have said? That we saw some giant fur-covered monster in the woods? In 1963, in East Texas? We would have been laughed out of town, or worse, been the butt of jokes for years to come, so we made a pact right there in that truck. We would never speak of it again, not to each other, not to anyone. The next day at school, we barely looked at each other in the halls. It was like we were all afraid that making eye contact would somehow bring it all back. By unspoken agreement, we drifted apart after that night. We were still cordial when we ran into each other, but the easy friendship we'd had was gone, replaced by this terrible shared secret. The dogs made it home eventually. Blue showed up at our door around dawn, muddy and exhausted, but otherwise okay. Ranger and Scout found their way back to Tommy's place the next day. But they were different after that night, jumpy, nervous. Blue would never hunt again. He'd whine and shake whenever my dad tried to take him out. I told myself for years that it was just a bear. A deformed bear, maybe, or one that was sick or rabid. That's what I told myself during those nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of that howl still echoing in my ears. But I knew better. We all did. It wasn't until the 70s when I saw a newspaper article about Bigfoot sightings in the Pacific Northwest that I began to realize we might not have been alone in what we saw. And over the decades, as more stories emerged, as the term Sasquatch entered the popular vocabulary, I would find myself staring at blurry photos or reading accounts, recognizing details that matched our experience. I never told anyone, Not my wife, not my children. I kept that promise we made in the truck. But now, all these years later, with Tommy, Ray, and Donnie gone, and Bobby in a nursing home with Alzheimer's, I wonder if keeping silent was the right thing. Whatever we saw that night in Marlow Bottom wasn't supposed to exist. It shouldn't have been possible. But it was there, as real as the ground beneath my feet. And sometimes, when I'm driving past those woods, or when I wake up at 3 in the morning for no reason, I can still hear that sound it made, that howl that seemed to come from the dawn of time. And I know that some things in this world defy explanation. I'm an old man now, and I've never gone hunting again. Never could bring myself to walk in deep woods after dark. Some fear stays with you forever. And whatever that thing was, it's still out there. I feel it in my bones. Story 11. I still can't explain what followed us that night in Cherokee National Forest. It's been over 4 years, and I break out in a cold sweat just thinking about it. I've been hunting my whole life, spent countless nights in those woods, but nothing prepared me for what happened in October 2019. Me, my then girlfriend Amber, and my blue-tick hound Gracie headed out for some night coon hunting near the Toledo River. Nothing unusual about that. I'd been coon hunting since I was a kid, and Gracie was one of the best tracking dogs I'd ever owned. She had this distinctive bawl when she'd tree something that you could hear for half a mile. We got to our usual spot around 8 in the evening. Weather was perfect. Cool but not cold, clear night with a 3/4 moon, just enough light to see where you're walking without tripping over everything. We'd been having a good season, and Gracie was on fire that year, averaging 2 or 3 coons a night. The first couple hours went normal. Gracie treed 2 raccoons in quick succession, and we bagged them both. Pretty routine stuff. Around 10:30, we decided to move over to this area with some beaver ponds I knew about. It was maybe a 1.5-mile hike, but the hunting was usually good there because raccoons like to wash their food in the water. When we got to the ponds, Gracie caught a scent almost immediately. She took off like a rocket, that baying sound echoing through the trees. But something was different this time. Her bark changed. It wasn't her normal "I found a raccoon" bark. It was deeper, more urgent. Every hunter knows their dog's different barks, and this one made the hair on my neck stand up. I remember saying to Amber, "That ain't no coon she's after." We followed Gracie's tracking collar signal and her barking, but the weird thing was, whatever she was chasing kept treeing and then running again. Raccoons don't usually do that. Once they're up a tree, they stay there. This thing would go up, then come back down and run before we could get there, like it was deliberately leading us somewhere. After about 20 minutes of this strange chase, Gracie went completely silent. Her collar showed she wasn't moving, which scared the hell out of me. Then, suddenly, the signal started coming back toward us fast. When she burst out of the underbrush, my stomach dropped. Gracie, my fearless hunting dog who would chase anything, was running back to us with her tail tucked between her legs, whimpering. She pressed herself against my legs, shaking. I'd never seen her like that. Not once in 6 years. This was a dog who'd faced down coyotes without blinking. "What's wrong, girl?" I asked, kneeling down to check her for injuries. She wasn't hurt, just terrified. Amber looked at me, and I could see she was getting spooked too. "Maybe we should head back," she said. I nodded, feeling a bit embarrassed but also relieved. Whatever had scared Gracie that bad wasn't something I wanted to meet in the dark with just a .22 rifle and a dying flashlight. The batteries were already getting weak, giving everything that sickly yellow glow instead of bright white. We turned around and started walking back toward where we'd parked my truck, about 2 miles away. Gracie stayed right at my heels, which wasn't like her at all. She usually ranges out front, but that night she wouldn't get more than 2 feet from me. We'd gone maybe a 1/4 mile when I first heard it. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps, maybe 30 or 40 feet off to our right, moving parallel to us through the trees. At first, I thought it might be a deer, but the rhythm was all wrong. These were deliberate steps, the sound of something walking on 2 legs. "You hear that?" I whispered to Amber. She nodded, her eyes wide. What is it? Probably just another hunter, I said, not believing it for a second. No hunter moves like that in the dark. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice sounded thin and weak in the darkness. No response, but the footsteps stopped. We kept walking, faster now. After a minute, the footsteps started again, keeping pace with us, staying just out of sight in the darkness beyond our flashlight beam. Then we heard a loud snap, the sound of a thick branch breaking, not on the ground, but high up, like 7 or 8 feet off the ground at least. Amber grabbed my arm so tight it hurt. "Travis, what the fuck is that?" "I don't know," I admitted, and swung my flashlight toward the sound. Just as the beam hit the trees, I caught a glimpse of something. Not an animal, not a person, just a dark shape moving behind a tree trunk. It was big, taller than a man. The movement was quick but deliberate, like it knew exactly when I was going to shine the light and was already hiding. Gracie let out this low growl I'd never heard from her before, a sound that made my skin crawl. She wasn't running anymore, just pressing against my leg, her muscles tense. We picked up our pace, trying not to run outright. Running in the woods at night is a good way to break an ankle, and the thought of being injured out there with that thing following us was worse than facing it on my feet. The footsteps followed us, matching our speed. Then they stopped, and for a moment I thought maybe whatever it was had given up. But a minute later, we heard the same heavy footfalls coming from ahead of us and to the left. "It circled around," Amber whispered, her voice shaking. That's when I realized it was flanking us, cutting off our route back to the truck. My mouth went dry. This wasn't random animal behavior, this was strategy. I stopped and raised my rifle, pointing it toward the sounds. "We're armed," I shouted, trying to sound confident. "Back off!" The footsteps paused, then we heard another branch snap, this time closer, maybe 20 feet away. I swung the flashlight wildly, catching nothing but trees and shadows. "Let's move," I said, and we started walking again, faster than before. For the next 45 minutes, this thing played with us like a cat with a mouse. It would walk parallel to us for a while, then circle ahead, then fall behind, only to appear on our other side. Always just out of sight, always snapping branches or moving brush to let us know it was there. A couple times it mimicked Gracie's bark, but the sound was wrong, deeper, hollow somehow. The worst moment came when we were about half a mile from the truck. We heard a tremendous crack behind us, like a tree breaking. Not a branch this time, a whole tree, at least 3 inches thick from the sound of it. It takes serious strength to snap a living tree that size. Amber started crying, trying to keep quiet, but failing. I wasn't in much better shape. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the flashlight steady. Gracie had gone from growling to complete silence, like she was trying to be invisible. I made a decision then. "We're going to run for it," I whispered to Amber. "But what if, on 3, 1, 2, 3... We took off through the woods, flashlight beam bouncing wildly, branches whipping at our faces. I didn't care about breaking an ankle anymore. I just wanted to get to that truck. Gracie was right with us, running silently, which was eerie in itself. Behind us, the footsteps changed from walking to running too, heavy, powerful strides that gained on us quickly. Whatever was chasing us wasn't even trying to be stealthy anymore. It was coming straight for us. Just as I thought it was going to catch us, we broke through the tree line onto the dirt access road where I'd parked. My old Ford F-150 sat there like a sanctuary, its metal frame suddenly the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the doors. We piled in, me, Amber, and Gracie all in the front seat. I cranked the engine, threw it in reverse, and spun around so fast I nearly put us in the ditch. As we pulled away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. There, at the edge of the forest where we'd emerged, I saw a dark figure step halfway out of the trees. The headlights didn't reach that far, and my flashlight was on the floor of the truck, but I could see it was tall, much taller than a man. It just stood there watching us drive away. I hit the gas, and didn't slow down until we reached the main highway. Amber was sobbing, and Gracie was still trembling between us. I was in shock, trying to process what had just happened, what I'd just seen. That was our last hunting trip together. Amber and I broke up a month later, not directly because of that night, but it didn't help. Gracie never went hunting again either. She'd go outside during the day just fine, but as soon as dusk hit, she wanted inside. Something in her changed that night. I've spent my whole life in those woods. I've seen bears, coyotes, wild boars, you name it. This wasn't any of those. No animal I know stalks humans that way, thinking steps ahead, deliberately trying to frighten its prey before striking. And no animal I know can snap a 3-inch tree trunk like it's nothing. I still hunt, but never in that part of Cherokee National Forest, and never at night anymore. Sometimes I think about going back in daylight, finding that spot again, looking for evidence of what followed us. But then I remember the sound of those footsteps, the way they paced us so deliberately, the intelligence behind that stalking pattern. And I decide some questions are better left unanswered. Story 12. I've never shared this with anyone except my closest friends, but I need to get this off my chest. I live in a rural area of northeastern Minnesota, about 40 minutes from the nearest town. My property sits on the edge of a small lake with dense forest surrounding 3 sides and a dirt access road on the 4th. I've lived here since 2008, and I love the isolation and quiet most of the time. Until August of 2010, I never questioned what might be in those woods. Now I'm not so sure. It started on a sweltering night in early August. The humidity was oppressive, the kind where your clothes stick to your skin the moment you step outside. I had all the windows open, hoping for any kind of breeze. My 2 Labrador retrievers, Buck and Sadie, had been acting strange all evening. Normally they love their evening walks around the property, especially down to the lakefront where they can splash around. But that night, they flat out refused to go more than a few feet from the porch. I remember trying to coax them with treats, something that never fails, but they just whined and backed toward the door. I figured maybe they sensed a coyote or something and didn't think much more about it. By around midnight, I was in bed reading, with the dogs curled up at my feet. The ceiling fan was spinning on high, but it wasn't doing much against the thick, damp air. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. The dogs were standing perfectly still at the bedroom window, their bodies rigid, not making a sound. Not barking, not growling, just frozen, staring out into the darkness. That's when I noticed the smell. God, that smell. I'll never forget it. It was like the worst body odor you can imagine, mixed with wet dog and something rotten, like meat left out in the sun for days. It was so strong I actually gagged. At first, I thought maybe a skunk had sprayed right outside, or some animal had died under the porch. But this was different, more concentrated, more purposeful somehow. I got up to close the window, thinking that would help. But as I approached, the dogs didn't move. They didn't even acknowledge me. Their eyes were fixed on something outside that I couldn't see in the darkness. The smell got stronger as I got closer to the window, and I felt this overwhelming sense of being watched. The hair on my arms stood up, and I had this primal urge to back away from the window to hide. Instead, I quickly slammed the window shut, pulled the curtains closed, and turned on every light in the house. The dogs finally moved, but they stayed close to me for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the couch with a baseball bat across my lap until sunrise, listening. The smell lingered until morning, even with the windows closed. When daylight came, I checked around the property but found nothing unusual, no tracks, no dead animals, nothing disturbed. I told myself it was probably just a bear, or maybe even my imagination playing tricks on me after watching too many late-night documentaries. The dogs seemed to return to normal as the day went on, and eventually I pushed the incident to the back of my mind. Fast forward almost exactly 1 year later. It was August 10th, 2011. I remember the date because it was my sister's birthday, and I'd called her earlier that evening. The weather was nearly identical to that night the year before. Hot, sticky, like the air itself was a wet blanket. I had done laundry that day and, like an idiot, had left it until late to hang it out to dry. By late, I mean it was around midnight when I finally dragged myself outside with the basket of wet clothes. My property has a clothesline that runs from a corner of the house to a tall post about 30 feet away, near the edge of the horse pasture. Beyond the pasture is a swampy area where the land slopes down toward the lake. I was hanging the last few items when both dogs, who had been sniffing around nearby, suddenly froze. Then, in unison, they bolted back to the house porch and stood there, staring toward the pasture and swamp. That's when I noticed the silence, complete, absolute silence. No frogs croaking in the swamp, no crickets chirping, no distant coyotes howling, nothing. If you've ever lived in the country, you know how unnatural that is. The night is never quiet, it's full of life and sound, but in that moment, it was like someone had hit a mute button on the world. The air felt different too, heavier, thicker, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. I remember feeling like I was being watched again, but this time the feeling was so strong, it was almost physical, like a hand on the back of my neck. I looked toward where the dogs were staring, but couldn't see anything in the darkness beyond the reach of the porch light. I abandoned the last few items in the basket and walked as calmly as I could back to the house, fighting the urge to run. The smell hadn't appeared yet, but something in me knew it was coming. I barely made it inside before it hit, that same unmistakable stench from the year before. It seemed to seep through the closed windows, less intense than before, but definitely the same odor. The dogs wouldn't leave my side all night. They paced, whined softly, and kept looking toward the windows. I sat up all night again, lights on, waiting for morning. The smell faded after a couple of hours, but the silence outside persisted until dawn, when the birds finally started singing again. The dogs didn't relax until the sun was fully up. The next day, I was driving to town along the access road that borders my property when I saw something that made me slam on the brakes. Standing just off the road, partially hidden by underbrush but clearly visible, was what I initially thought was a wolf. But this was no ordinary wolf. It stood at least 4 feet at the shoulder, maybe more, with dark, grayish-brown fur. It was watching my car with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. Wolves typically run when they see vehicles, but this creature just stood there, observing me with what I can only describe as calm curiosity. I fumbled for my phone to take a picture, but by the time I had it ready, the animal had melted back into the forest without a sound. I sat there for several minutes, trying to process what I'd seen. I've lived around wildlife my whole life, and I know what wolves, coyotes, and bears look like. This was different. Too big for a wolf, wrong shape for a bear. That night, I went down the internet rabbit hole. I started researching large predators in Minnesota, thinking maybe there was some explanation for what I'd seen. That's when I stumbled across Bigfoot sightings in my area. I've never been one for cryptids or conspiracy theories, but as I read account after account, chills ran down my spine. The patterns were eerily familiar. Strong, musky odors that appeared suddenly, animals acting fearful and strange, unnatural silence in the woods, sightings of unusually large, wolf-like creatures that some researchers believe might be juvenile Sasquatch. One article mentioned how these creatures are most active in specific areas during certain times of the year, often establishing regular patterns. Both of my experiences happened in August, almost exactly 1 year apart. Was something visiting my property on some kind of annual migration? I've installed motion-activated cameras around my property since then. Most of the time, they just capture deer, raccoons, and the occasional bear. But every August, something strange happens. The cameras either malfunction or the batteries drain unexpectedly, or the footage shows nothing but static at certain hours of the night, and the dogs still refuse to go out after dark for a few days each August. Last year, I stayed with my sister in the city during that week in August. When I returned, my neighbor mentioned he'd heard weird howling sounds coming from near my property one night while I was gone. Not like coyotes or wolves, he said, but something deeper, more resonant. Something that made him keep his own dogs inside for the rest of the week. I've never actually seen a Bigfoot on my property. I don't have footprints or hair samples or definitive proof of any kind. But those experiences, the smell, the silence, the fear in my dogs, and that strange wolf-like creature, have convinced me that something unexplained visits my land. Something that doesn't fit neatly into what we know about North American wildlife. I still live here, and I still love it most of the time, but I don't hang laundry after dark anymore, especially not in August. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night and the house is quiet, I catch myself listening for that moment when the normal sounds of the night suddenly stop, because that's when I know it's back. Story 13. I still have trouble sleeping some nights. It's been a little over 3 months since our camping trip at Hidden Hollow in Fernwood State Forest, but I can't shake what happened there. My wife says I need to talk about it, get it out somehow, so here goes. For context, my brother Craig and I have been doing this annual camping trip since we were in our 20s. It started as just us, then our wives joined, and now we bring all the kids. It's usually the highlight of our summer. Grilling hot dogs, telling stories around the campfire, teaching the kids about nature. Normal family stuff, you know? This year felt no different at first. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, set up our 2 campsites next to each other, and fell into our usual routines. Craig's always been the outdoorsy one between us. He hunts, fishes, knows all the edible plants and animal tracks. I'm more of the bring extra batteries and make sure everyone has sunscreen type. Between us, we've always felt pretty prepared for anything the woods could throw at us. The first couple days were perfect. Weather in the high 70s, low humidity, clear skies. The kind of camping weather you pray for. The kids were having a blast, especially my little Benjamin, who at 3 years old was on his first real camping trip. He brought his stuffed monkey, Dookie, which hasn't left his side since his first birthday. That thing is absolutely disgusting. Matted fur, missing an eye, permanent juice stains. But Ben treats it like gold. On the 3rd day, we decided to hike this easy trail that loops around to a small clearing with picnic tables. It's literally just a half-mile walk, super simple, and we thought it would be perfect for a lunch spot. We packed sandwiches, chips, fruit, the works. The 9 of us headed out around noon, the older kids running ahead, while Ben toddled along holding his monkey in one hand and my finger in the other. Lunch was normal. The kids played tag in the clearing while we adults chatted. I remember thinking how perfect everything was. One of those rare moments where everyone's happy at the same time, you know? We headed back to camp around 5:30, just as the sun was starting to dip. We hadn't been back at the campsite for more than 20 minutes when Ben started freaking out, full-blown meltdown. "Dookie! Dookie gone!" If you've ever had a 3-year-old, you know there's no reasoning with them when their comfort item disappears. My wife Ellie tried distracting him, offering snacks, his tablet, anything, but he was inconsolable. I searched our tent, the campsite, the car, nothing. That's when I realized he must have dropped it somewhere on the trail during our hike. The sun was already starting to set, probably around 6 or so. Craig must have seen the panic on my face because he immediately offered to help look for it. "We better hurry," he said, grabbing his flashlight. "It'll be dark soon." I kissed Ellie, told her we'd be back in 30 minutes tops, and grabbed my own flashlight. Ben was still crying, red-faced and hiccuping as we headed back toward the trail. I promised him we'd find Dookie, though honestly I wasn't sure we would. That forest gets pitch black at night. The trail was already getting dim when we started walking. The trees overhead blocked what little sunlight remained. and the temperature had dropped enough that I wished I'd grabbed my jacket. Craig led the way, sweeping his flashlight across the path. We'd been walking maybe 10 or 15 minutes when we heard it. 3 distinct banging noises coming from somewhere to our left, off trail in the thick of the woods. Thunk, thunk, thunk. "What was that?" I asked, stopping. Craig shrugged. "Probably a woodpecker. At dusk. Could be a camper setting up late," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. We kept walking, but something felt different. The forest seemed quieter somehow, like all the normal little background noises had suddenly cut out. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just our footsteps on the dirt path. I was shining my light along the edges of the trail, looking for any sign of that ratty, stuffed monkey, when I noticed Craig's flashlight beam suddenly jerk to the left, pointing deep into the trees. I turned to see him frozen in place, his body rigid in what I can only describe as a hunting stance, completely still, alert, focused. "What is it?" I whispered, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. He stood there for several seconds before slowly lowering his light back to the trail. "Thought I saw something," he muttered, and started walking again. "Saw what?" "Nothing. Just my eyes playing tricks." But something had changed in his demeanor. Craig, who's usually laid back and joking around, was now scanning the tree line continuously, his shoulders tense. I've known my brother my entire life, and I knew that look. He was spooked. We finally reached the picnic area where we'd had lunch. The clearing looked completely different in the growing darkness, shadows stretching across the ground, the picnic tables looking somehow ominous. I immediately started searching under the tables, around the trash cans, everywhere I could think of where Ben might have set down his toy. That's when we heard more knocking sounds, but this time they came from multiple directions. One set from behind us, then another responding from somewhere ahead. Thunk, thunk, pause. Thunk, 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 from another direction. "What the hell is that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Craig wasn't even pretending to look for the stuffed animal anymore. He was standing in the middle of the clearing, turning slowly, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as he scanned the tree line. "I don't know," he said quietly. I walked over to him. "Craig, what's going on? You're freaking me out." He hesitated before answering. "Something's following us. I haven't seen it, but I'm hearing it." "What do you mean, something? Like a bear?" He shook his head. "Bears don't make knocking sounds." A wave of goosebumps washed over me. I'd never seen my brother like this. Craig is the guy who laughs at horror movies, who walks through dark alleys without a second thought. Seeing him on edge made my heart rate double. "Let's just find the damn monkey and get out of here," I said, my voice shaking slightly. We resumed our search, but now I was hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. The darkness between the trees seemed to pulse with something I couldn't identify. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, I spotted something at the edge of the trail leading away from the picnic area. "There!" I hissed, pointing my light. Sure enough, there was Dookie, lying face down in the dirt, one arm reaching toward the woods as if pointing at something. I snatched it up quickly, shoving it into my pocket. "Got it. Let's go." We turned back toward camp, walking faster than before. Craig kept his flashlight moving, sweeping from side to side, occasionally looking over his shoulder. The knocking sounds had stopped, but somehow the silence felt even worse. As we crossed back through the picnic clearing, Craig suddenly grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "Josh," he whispered, his voice so quiet I barely heard him. "Bigfoot." I nearly laughed out loud from the absurdity and relief. "Seriously? You're freaking out over Bigfoot? I thought it was a..." The words died in my throat as Craig pointed his flashlight toward a cluster of trees about 30 yards away. At first, I thought I was looking at tree bark, a dark, irregular shape against the trunk. But then the bark moved slightly, and I realized what I was seeing. It wasn't bark. It was fur. Shiny, dark fur that caught the light of our flashlights and shimmered before disappearing behind the actual tree. My brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. The creature, and it was definitely a creature, was massive. If I had to guess, it stood at least 8 feet tall, dwarfing both Craig and me. We're not small guys. I'm 6'1", Craig's 6'2", but this thing made us look like children. We stood frozen, flashlights trained on the spot where it had been. I was convinced I was hallucinating, that the darkness was playing tricks on us, but then we heard it, a low, rumbling grunt that seemed to vibrate through my chest. And then, impossibly, a second figure crossed the trail beyond the first one. Bigger, moving with shocking grace for its size, it slipped between trees that seemed too close together to allow passage for something so large. I couldn't breathe. My entire body was locked in place, every instinct screaming at me to run, but unable to make my legs work. Craig's hand was still gripping my arm, his fingers digging in so hard I'd find bruises the next day. After what felt like forever, the first creature turned. I caught the briefest glimpse of broad shoulders and a sloped head before it simply melted into the darkness. No crashing through underbrush, no heavy footsteps, just silent disappearance, as if the forest had swallowed it whole. "Run," Craig whispered. "Don't look back." I don't remember much about that sprint back to camp. Just fragments, branches whipping past my face, my lungs burning, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly as we ran. I remember thinking about my family, about little Ben waiting for his stuffed monkey, about how absurd this whole situation was. We burst into the campsite, gasping for breath. Our wives looked up from the fire they'd built, concern written across their faces. "What happened?" Ellie asked, standing up. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Craig and I exchanged looks. How could we possibly explain what we'd seen? Would they even believe us? "Found Dookie," I managed, pulling the filthy stuffed animal from my pocket and handing it to Ellie. Ben had fallen asleep waiting, thank God. That night, after the kids were tucked into their sleeping bags, Craig and I tried to explain what we'd seen. As expected, our wives were skeptical. Craig's wife, Julie, actually laughed, asking if we'd found a flask of whiskey along with the monkey. But around 11:30, as we sat around the dying campfire, we all heard it, wood knocks just like before coming from the direction of the trail. 3 distinct sounds. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Julie stopped laughing. Ellie grabbed my hand. Then came the howl. Not a wolf, not a coyote, not anything I'd ever heard before. It started low and rose to a pitch that made the hair on my arms stand up, echoing through the trees before fading into silence. We didn't sleep that night. We packed up at first light and were on the road before the kids even fully woke up. We made excuses about bad weather coming, about work emergencies, anything to explain our sudden departure. Craig and I have talked about it since then, trying to make sense of what we saw. He's convinced it was a family of Sasquatch. I don't know what to believe. All I know is that something was out there in those woods, something that defied explanation. I've looked online, read accounts from others who claim to have had similar experiences. Some details match up eerily well. The wood knocks as communication, the ability to move silently despite their size, the feeling of being watched. We haven't told anyone else. Who would believe us? Sometimes I'm not even sure I believe it myself. But then I'll wake up at 3 in the morning, heart pounding, remembering the way that creature moved, the impossible silence of something so large, and I know what I saw. We're skipping our annual camping trip this year. Some traditions just aren't worth continuing. Story 14. I never thought I'd share this, but after keeping it bottled up for so long, I need to get it off my chest. This happened back in '78, and I still can't make sense of it to this day. I've been a fisherman all my life, born and raised right here in Montgomery County, Texas. My daddy taught me to fish before I could properly tie my shoes, and I've known these waters like the back of my hand since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Lake Conroe has always been my go-to spot. Peaceful, good fishing. and I'd never had any reason to feel unsafe there. Until that evening in late October. It was a Wednesday, and I'd taken the afternoon off from my construction job to get some fishing in before the cold front that was supposed to hit that weekend. The lake was quiet. Tourist season was long over, and most locals were at work. Perfect conditions. I'd been having a decent day, caught a few bass, nothing spectacular but enough to make the trip worthwhile. As the sun started dropping low, I decided to try my luck at this little cove near the edge of Sam Houston National Forest. It's a bit secluded, but I'd always had good luck there with the bigger fish. The air was getting that fall crispness to it as evening approached. I remember checking my watch around 5:30 and thinking I should probably start packing up soon. That's when I heard it. At first it was just some rustling in the brush, maybe 100 yards from the bank. Nothing unusual. These woods are full of deer, wild hogs, all sorts of critters. I didn't even look up from my tackle box at first. But then the sound changed. It's hard to describe, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before. It started as this low grunting, almost like a hog, but wrong somehow. Deeper, more deliberate. Then came this sound of branches breaking, not like when a deer steps on a twig, but like something was snapping them intentionally, angry-like. I've spent my entire life in these woods, hunted everything from squirrels to whitetails since I was 12 years old. I know every sound an East Texas forest makes, day or night. This wasn't right. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. You know that feeling when your body recognizes danger before your brain does. That primal instinct kicked in hard. I slowly turned toward the sound, squinting to see through the thickening shadows as the sun was setting behind the trees. The brush was moving, something big pushing through it, much bigger than a deer. My first thought was maybe a black bear, though they're pretty rare around here. But the movement wasn't right for a bear either. I couldn't see it clearly, just glimpses of something dark moving between the trees about 100 yards up from the shore. But what I could see was enough to tell me this wasn't something I recognized. The shape was all wrong, too tall, I don't know, just wrong. Then it made that sound again, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the air around me. No bear or hog makes a sound like that. And the way it was breaking those branches, it sounded deliberate, like it was angry or trying to intimidate. I'm not ashamed to admit I panicked. 30 years in these woods, and I've never felt fear like that. It was like my body knew something my mind couldn't accept. I dropped my tackle box, didn't even bother securing my gear properly. I yanked the cord on my outboard motor so hard I nearly pulled it clean off. The motor sputtered to life, and I've never been so grateful for anything in my life. I pushed away from the bank and opened that throttle all the way. My little aluminum boat probably never moved so fast, bouncing across the water as I headed straight for the boat ramp. The whole time, I kept looking back over my shoulder, half expecting to see something coming after me. The shoreline faded into darkness as I sped away, but I swear I could still hear those branches breaking even over my motor. I reached the boat ramp in record time. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get my boat on the trailer. I didn't even drain the live well, just strapped everything down as quick as I could and got in my truck. I remember sitting there for a minute, just breathing hard, trying to calm down enough to drive. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself I was being stupid, that it was just some animal, maybe a wounded hog or something. But deep down I knew better. Whatever was in those woods wasn't something that belonged there. I drove home in a daze. Didn't tell my wife about it when I got back. Just said the fishing was slow and I'd decided to pack it in early. I didn't sleep much that night, kept hearing that growl in my dreams. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd overreacted. Maybe it was exhaustion from working overtime the previous week, or maybe my imagination got the better of me in the fading light. I decided to keep it to myself. No sense in getting a reputation as the guy who got spooked by a wild hog. Then, not even 24 hours later, everything changed. I'd stopped by Elijah's general store on my lunch break to grab some cigarettes and a soda. Elijah's place has been a fixture in our community for decades. Part store, part unofficial meeting place where locals catch up on gossip and news. I was at the counter paying when the door burst open with a bang. In stumbled old Walter Jenkins, looking like he'd seen the devil himself. Walter's been around forever, must be pushing 80, but I'd never seen him move so fast or look so terrified. "There's something out there," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Something by my property." Elijah tried to calm him down while a few of us gathered around. Walter was breathing hard, his hands shaking worse than mine had been the night before. "What happened, Walter?" Elijah asked, pouring him a cup of coffee from behind the counter. Walter's story came out in bursts between gulps of air. He'd been having trouble with something killing his hogs for the past few weeks. At first, he thought it was coyotes or maybe a mountain lion, though those are pretty rare around here these days. But the way the animals were killed wasn't right, not torn up like predators usually do. "This morning," Walter said, his voice steadier now but still tight with fear, "I was driving into town for feed, just past the bend where my property meets the forest edge. It crossed right in front of my truck. The store went quiet. Walter's farm sits right at the edge of Sam Houston National Forest, not 5 miles from where I'd been fishing." "What crossed, Walter?" someone asked. "I don't know," he said, looking down at his coffee cup. "Never seen anything like it. Tall as a man, maybe taller. Walking on 2 legs, but hunched over. Dark-colored. Moved fast. Real fast. Crossed the road in 3 steps and disappeared into the trees." My blood ran cold. The coffee I was drinking suddenly tasted like dirt in my mouth. "Come back with me," Walter was saying, looking around at the faces in the store. "I need someone to come see. There's tracks, strange tracks by the road where it crossed." Nobody volunteered. A few of the men exchanged looks, and I could tell they thought Walter was just a confused old man, maybe seeing things that weren't there. After all, Walter lived alone since his wife passed, and sometimes solitude plays tricks on the mind. But I knew better. I'd heard it myself, less than a day earlier. Whatever Walter had seen, I'd heard it in those woods by the lake. I wanted to speak up, to tell them what I'd experienced, but something held me back. Fear, I guess. Not just of whatever was out there, but of sounding crazy, of having people look at me the way they were looking at Walter. So I stayed quiet as Walter pleaded for someone to come back to his place with him. Eventually, Elijah promised to call the sheriff to check things out, and Walter left, still visibly shaken, but a little calmer. As soon as he was gone, the jokes started. "Old Walter's been nipping at the moonshine again," someone said, and everyone laughed. Everyone except me. I finished my lunch break and went back to work, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was that sound in the woods and Walter's description. I've spent the last 45 years trying to convince myself there's a rational explanation, but deep down, I know there isn't. That night I broke down and told my wife about what I'd heard at the lake. She listened patiently, then suggested maybe it was just a bear passing through. I let her believe that's what I thought too. A few days later, word got around that the sheriff had checked Walter's property and found some unusual tracks, but officially claimed they were probably from a large hog, or maybe a bear. The story about Walter seeing a monster became a local joke for a while, but here's the thing, I never went fishing in that cove again, never even took my boat to that side of the lake, and I noticed Walter started keeping more dogs on his property and installed floodlights all around his barn. Over the years, I've heard other stories, hunters having strange experiences in certain parts of the Sam Houston forest, people hearing unusual sounds at night. Most folks dismiss these tales as campfire stories or the product of too much whiskey, but I know what I heard that evening. And I know Walter Jenkins saw something real that crossed his road that morning. Sometimes when I'm driving near the edge of the forest, I still get that feeling on the back of my neck, like something's watching from between the trees. Whatever it was, it's still out there. I'm sure of it. And to this day, I can't explain what it could have been. All I know is there are some parts of those woods where I won't set foot again no matter what. Story 15. I've been carrying this memory for over 40 years now. It was 1981 and I was 8 years old. My family lived in a small development outside Roanoke, Virginia. Not quite rural, but definitely not in town either. Our house backed up to woods that seemed to stretch on forever to my young mind. I've told this story maybe 5 times in my life, and I'm always met with the same skeptical looks. I get it. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. It was late July, hot and sticky like only Virginia summers can be. My buddy Kevin from 2 doors down was sleeping over. Kevin was 10, practically ancient to me back then, and I thought he was the coolest kid ever. We'd spent the evening playing Atari, reading comics, and talking about Star Wars until my parents finally made us go to bed around 10. But of course, we didn't actually sleep. We whispered and laughed under the covers with flashlights until well past midnight. Around 2 in the morning, we got hungry, the way only little boys with hollow legs can get hungry after already eating an entire pizza and bowl of popcorn earlier. "Let's raid the kitchen," Kevin whispered, and I was game immediately. My parents were heavy sleepers, and my dad even took these pills that knocked him out completely. We knew we wouldn't get caught. We crept downstairs, avoiding the 3rd step from the bottom that always creaked. The house was pitch black, except for the little nightlight in the hallway. I remember the linoleum floor was cold on my bare feet. We made it to the kitchen, opened the fridge as quietly as we could, and the light spilled out into the dark room. We grabbed some Coke cans and leftover birthday cake from my little sister's party the weekend before. On the way back through the living room, I did something I'd always done since I was little. There was this pole lamp next to our big picture window that looked out onto the backyard. My mum would turn it on at night sometimes, and I loved how it lit up a circle of the yard. I don't know why, but I always had to flip that light on when I passed it at night. It was just a habit, like a security thing, I guess. So I clicked it on and automatically glanced out the window like I always did. That's when I saw it. I froze with my hand still on the lamp switch. Kevin was a few steps ahead of me, already heading for the stairs with his arms full of snacks. He must have noticed I wasn't following because he turned around. "What are you?" he started to say, but then he saw my face and followed my gaze out the window. There, walking directly across our backyard in the circle of yellow light, was something I still can't fully explain. It was massive, not like, oh, that's a big guy, massive, but impossibly, unnaturally huge. It was covered in dark brown hair or fur that hung kind of smooth, not matted or messy, but not particularly neat either. The thing walked upright on 2 legs, but nothing about its movement was human. Its arms were wrong, way too long, swinging down almost to its knees as it walked. But what really got me, what still gives me chills when I think about it, was its upper body. It had no neck, or at least none that I could see. Its head just seemed to melt right into these incredibly wide shoulders, giving its whole upper body this weird triangular shape. The whole sighting probably lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. The thing was walking at a steady pace through the light from our window. But the part that still haunts me is when it noticed the light hit it. It didn't turn its head to look at us. It twisted its entire upper body toward the window while its legs kept moving forward. No human moves like that. It was like watching someone with a completely different skeletal structure. Its face was mostly in shadow, but I could tell it had seen us. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember blinking. I just stood there, Coke can sweating in my hand, birthday cake forgotten. Kevin grabbed my arm so hard it left marks, and then we both bolted. We didn't even try to be quiet anymore. We thundered up those stairs like death itself was chasing us, slammed my bedroom door, and pushed my dresser in front of it. We didn't say a word to each other. We just huddled on my bed, backs against the wall, staring at the door until the sun came up. My parents never woke up somehow. The next morning, they found the mess in the kitchen, the open fridge, the cake crumbs, the lamp still on, and just assumed we'd snuck down for a midnight snack. My dad laughed and called us growing boys, while my mum half-heartedly scolded us about wasting electricity. I couldn't bring myself to tell them what we'd seen. Even at 8, I knew they wouldn't believe me. They'd think it was just my imagination or that Kevin and I were making up stories. But I knew what I saw. After breakfast, while my parents were busy with my little sister, I snuck out to the backyard. I had to see if there was any evidence. The grass where the thing had walked was pressed down in huge impressions, not craters or anything, but definite depressions where the grass had been crushed down into the dirt. I tried to measure one by putting my foot next to it. My whole foot, sneaker and all, could have fit into it twice, side by side. And the distance between prints? I tried to jump from one to the next and couldn't make it, not even close. Kevin came over while I was out there. We didn't talk much about what we'd seen. It was like if we didn't say it out loud, maybe it wouldn't be real. But we both knew. We spent the whole day inside playing board games, even though it was sunny and perfect outside. Neither of us wanted to be in that yard. For weeks afterward, none of the neighborhood kids played outside after dark. Somehow, without us ever telling the full story, word got around that something wasn't right. Maybe it was just the way Kevin and I acted, jumpy and nervous. Kids pick up on that stuff. My dad had planted this oak tree in our yard the previous fall. He told me it would grow to about 15 feet tall. Looking at that tree and remembering how tall the creature was in comparison is how I estimate it must have been 8 or 9 feet tall. No human is that big. No costume is that convincing up close. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs. But bears don't walk that way for extended periods. Their proportions are all wrong. A person in a suit. The movements were too fluid, too natural for its own bizarre body structure. The way it twisted to look at us wasn't something a person in a costume could fake. What bothers me most, even now, is how deliberate it seemed. It didn't panic when the light hit it. It didn't run or hide. It just kept walking, like it had somewhere specific to be. Like crossing through our yard was just part of its regular route. I lived in that house until I left for college. I never saw the creature again, but I never stopped looking for it either. Every night, I'd check the locks twice. I kept my blinds closed. I never went into the backyard after dark if I could help it. When I did, I felt watched. About 3 weeks after the sighting, something else happened that I've never been able to explain. I was in my room doing homework when I heard something hit my window, not hard, just a light tap. When I looked out, there was nothing there, but on the ground below my second-story window was a small pile of acorns. Could have been squirrels, I guess. But squirrels don't usually gather acorns and place them in perfect little pyramids. I told Kevin about it the next day. He got real quiet, then admitted he'd found something similar outside his bedroom window too. Not acorns, but a stack of smooth river stones that definitely hadn't been there before. We never told our parents. What would we say? Hey Mom, Dad, we think Bigfoot is leaving us presents. They'd have thought we were nuts. As we got older, Kevin and I drifted apart like kids do. His family moved away when we were in high school. Last I heard, he was working as an engineer somewhere out west. We haven't talked in probably 25 years, but I bet if I called him right now and said, "Remember that night," he'd know exactly what I was talking about. I'm 49 now. I've got kids of my own. We live in a suburb of Richmond, nowhere near the woods. I've taken them camping exactly once, and I didn't sleep the entire trip. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the bushes had me bolt upright in my sleeping bag. I've looked into Bigfoot sightings in the Roanoke area over the years. There have been dozens, some dating back to the 1950s. A few descriptions match what Kevin and I saw, especially that distinctive triangular upper body with no visible neck. Most people focus on the footprints or the height, but it's that weird body shape that convinces me others have seen the same thing. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't turned on that light. Would it have just passed by, never knowing we were there? Or was it coming to the house regardless? Was it curious about us the way we were terrified of it? I drive through Roanoke occasionally for work. A few years back, I took a detour to see my old house. New family living there now, of course. They've cut down that oak tree my dad planted. The woods behind the property have been partially cleared for more homes, but there's still a good stretch of forest there. As I sat in my car looking at my old bedroom window, I had the strangest feeling I was being watched. Not by the current homeowners. They weren't even home. By something in those remaining woods. Something that remembered me as clearly as I remembered it. I drove away and haven't been back since, but sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night and hear a sound outside my window, I think about those acorns stacked in a perfect little pyramid. I think about how that creature turned its entire torso to look at us while its legs kept moving forward. I think about those massive footprints that my 8-year-old feet couldn't begin to fill. And I wonder if it's still out there, walking through someone else's backyard in the middle of the night, leaving little gifts for frightened children who've seen something they weren't supposed to see. Story 16. I still get goosebumps when I think about what happened that night back in 1990. It's been over 30 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Some nights, I still wake up in a cold sweat, my mind replaying those few terrifying moments over and over again. I was 22 then, just finishing up college and enjoying a weekend camping trip with 5 of my buddies, Mike, Devin, Chris, Tyler, and Jason. We'd been friends since high school and tried to get together whenever our schedules allowed. This particular weekend, we'd decided to go camping near Helen, Georgia, just off State Route 75 by the Upper Chattahoochee River Recreation Area. It was early October, and the fall colors were starting to show. The days were warm, but the nights got chilly. Perfect camping weather. We'd spent the day hiking, fishing, and just hanging out around the campfire, telling stupid stories and drinking more beers than we probably should have. That night, man, I wish we'd just stayed at the campsite. It must have been around 11 at night when Jason suggested we take a walk up one of the nearby trails. There was a full moon, so we figured we wouldn't need flashlights. Plus, we were young and stupid and thought it would be more adventurous that way. The trail wasn't particularly difficult, just a winding path that led up the mountain through the woods. We were about 20 minutes into our hike when things got weird. The forest had been alive with sound, crickets chirping, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the light breeze, but suddenly everything went quiet. At the time, I didn't really register the silence. It was Mike who first noticed something was off. "Hey guys," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you see that?" He was pointing toward the tree line about 50 yards ahead of us, where the path curved around a ridge. At first, I didn't see anything, just shadows cast by the moonlight filtering through the trees. But then I saw it, a dark shape against the trees that didn't quite match the surroundings. We all stopped walking. The shape wasn't moving, but there was something wrong about it. It was too tall, too still. "Probably just a bear," Devin said, but his voice cracked a bit. Then the shape moved. Not like a bear would move, not like anything I'd ever seen move before. It stood up. I remember thinking, that can't be right, because what I was seeing didn't make sense. In the moonlight, we could see its silhouette clearly now. It was tall, impossibly tall. I work in agricultural marketing now, specializing in livestock dimensions and evaluations, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that what stood there was at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. And it wasn't human-shaped, not exactly. The proportions were all wrong. The arms too long, the shoulders too broad, the head oddly shaped. We all froze. No one said a word. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears and my mouth went dry. Time seemed to stretch out forever as we stared at the creature, and it, I assume, stared back at us. Then it moved again, and what happened next is something I still can't explain logically. The thing leapt, not forward or backward, but up and over the ridge. In a single bound, it cleared what must have been 30 feet of distance and disappeared down the other side. The strangest part, there was no sound, no rustling of leaves, no thud of landing, no sound of footsteps retreating, just complete silence. For a second, none of us moved or spoke. I think our brains were trying to process what we'd just seen. Then Tyler whispered, "What the fuck was that?" That broke the spell. Suddenly we were all talking at once, voices rising in panic. "Did you see that? How did it jump that far? That wasn't human. We need to get out of here." That last one came from me and no one disagreed. We turned around and practically ran back down the trail toward our campsite. I remember stumbling over roots and rocks, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that at any moment that thing would come, bounding after us. We made it back to our campsite in record time, all of us out of breath and wide-eyed with fear. Without discussion, we started packing up our stuff. There was no way any of us was going to sleep out there after what we'd seen. "Maybe it was just a bear," Chris said, as we hurriedly stuffed our sleeping bags into their sacks. "A bear that jumps 30 feet in a single bound, without making a sound," Mike shot back. "It wasn't a bear," I said firmly. "I don't know what it was, but it wasn't a bear." We were back in our cars and heading down State Route 75 within 30 minutes, our weekend trip cut short. On the drive back, we tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was a trick of the moonlight. Maybe we were all just drunk and imagining things. But deep down, I knew we had all seen the same thing, and it wasn't something that could be easily explained away. For years afterward, we didn't talk much about that night. When we did get together, someone might make a vague reference to our camping trip from hell, but we never really discussed the details. It was like we all silently agreed to pretend it never happened, but I couldn't forget the image of that silhouette standing up in the moonlight, those impossible proportions, that silent leap. It stuck with me. I'd find myself researching cryptids and local legends, trying to find anything that matched what we'd seen. There were stories about Bigfoot sightings in North Georgia, but they never quite matched up with our experience. Whatever we saw moved differently, more efficiently than the lumbering creature described in most Bigfoot accounts. Fast forward to 2006, 16 years after the incident. I was 38 by then, with a stable job and a reputation to maintain. I'd never told anyone outside of those 5 friends about what we'd seen, but the memory of it still nagged at me, especially whenever I'd see documentaries about unexplained phenomena or read about strange sightings in the wilderness. My dad was a practical man, a wilderness veteran who had once spent 3 months living off the land in North Georgia. He was skeptical of anything that couldn't be logically explained. So when I finally worked up the courage to tell him about what happened that night in 1990, I wasn't surprised by his reaction. "Sounds like you boys had too much to drink and spooked yourselves," he said with a chuckle. I'd expected that. What I hadn't expected was his offer to go back there with me. "If it'll put your mind at ease," he said, "I'll go up there with you. We'll check it out in broad daylight, and I'll show you there's nothing to be afraid of." I hesitated. The thought of going back to that place made my stomach knot up. But there was also a part of me that needed closure. And if anyone could provide a rational explanation for what we'd experienced, it was my dad. So in the summer of 2006, my dad and I drove up to Helen and made our way to the same campsite where my friends and I had stayed 16 years earlier. It looked much the same. a small clearing surrounded by towering pines and oaks with a fire pit in the center. We set up camp, and I tried to ignore the uneasiness that had settled in my gut. "So where did you see this creature?" my dad asked after we'd set up our tent. I pointed up the trail. "About 20 minutes that way, where the path curves around the ridge." He nodded. "Let's check it out." It was around 3 in the afternoon when we started up the trail. Walking it in daylight was completely different from that night in 1990. Birds were singing, squirrels darted across the path, and shafts of sunlight broke through the canopy above. It all seemed so normal, so safe. But as we got closer to the spot where we'd seen the silhouette, I started noticing something odd. There was a smell in the air, faint at first, but growing stronger as we continued. It was a musky, foul odor unlike anything I'd encountered before. Not like a dead animal or rotting vegetation, but something different. My dad noticed it too. "What is that smell?" he asked, wrinkling his nose. "I don't know," I replied, and I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warm summer air. We reached the curve in the trail where we'd seen the creature. The ridge was there just as I remembered it. In daylight, I could see that it wasn't as steep as it had seemed that night, but it was still a significant drop, maybe 20 feet down to the forest floor on the other side. "This is where you saw it?" my dad asked, looking around. I nodded. "It was standing right about there," I said, pointing to a spot near the tree line. "Then it jumped over the ridge and disappeared." My dad walked over to where I'd pointed and looked down the other side of the ridge. "That's quite a jump," he admitted. "But maybe what you saw was—" He stopped mid-sentence, his body suddenly tense. "What?" I asked, feeling my heart rate pick up. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away. He was looking at something down the ridge, his expression puzzled. Then he beckoned me over. "Look at that," he said, pointing to a young sapling about halfway down the slope. I looked where he was pointing and felt my blood run cold. The sapling, a tree maybe 3 inches in diameter, was twisted. Not broken or bent, but twisted, like someone had grabbed it and wrung it like a wet towel. And the twist wasn't at the base where a person might reach, but about 10 feet up the trunk. "That's not natural," my dad said quietly. "Something did that. Something strong." The smell was stronger now, that musky animal odor that wasn't quite like anything I recognized. And something else was bothering me too. The forest had gone quiet again, just like it had that night 16 years ago. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just silence. My dad noticed it too. "Let's head back," he said, and for the first time I heard a note of unease in his voice. As we walked back down the trail, neither of us spoke. The silence in the forest was oppressive, and that smell lingered in the air. About halfway back to our campsite, we ran into a park ranger on patrol. "Afternoon," he greeted us with a nod. "You folks camping nearby?" "Just up the trail," my dad replied. "Actually, we were wondering about something. We noticed a tree up there that's been twisted in an unusual way. Any idea what might cause that?" The ranger's expression changed slightly, just a flicker, but I caught it. A brief look of, what? Concern? Fear? "Probably just storm damage," he said, a bit too quickly. "We get some strong winds up here sometimes." "And there's an unusual smell up there too," I added. "Kind of musky." The ranger shifted uncomfortably. "We've had some reports of aggressive bears in the area lately. It's probably best if you stick to your campsite after dark. Maybe even consider moving to one of the more populated campgrounds." My dad and I exchanged a glance. We both knew that wasn't a normal ranger warning. They don't usually suggest people leave an area because of bears. They tell you to secure your food and make noise while hiking, not to evacuate. "What kind of bears?" my dad asked, his voice casual but his eyes intent. "Just bears," the ranger said vaguely. "Look, I'm just advising caution. These mountains can be unpredictable. With that, he continued up the trail, leaving us standing there with more questions than answers. We did end up staying that night, though we moved our tent closer to the parking area where a few other campers were set up. As we sat by our small fire that evening, my dad was unusually quiet. "So what do you think?" I finally asked him. "About what we saw up there today?" He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. "I think there are things in these mountains that don't have easy explanations," he said after a long pause. "That tree wasn't damaged by wind or a storm. Something twisted it, something strong, and that ranger knows more than he's saying." Coming from my skeptical, practical father, those words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the evening air. We didn't see the creature that night, but lying in my tent, listening to the sounds of the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That somewhere out there in the darkness, something was moving silently between the trees, something that could twist a sapling 10 feet off the ground, something that could leap across a ridge in a single bound. I've never gone back to that spot since then, but sometimes, when I'm driving through wooded areas at night, I find myself scanning the tree line, looking for a tall silhouette standing unnaturally still in the shadows. And I wonder what would happen if I ever saw it again.